On Christmas dinner, I handed my parents a small velvet box, thinking it would finally clear the air between us. Instead, my mother shoved it aside and announced to the entire table that I was a freeloader who could not even afford my own home. My father demanded I take my cheap gift and get out of his house. I could not help but smile as I opened the box myself and showed them the red-stamped legal document inside. Now they will not stop calling my phone. My name is Rachel. I am 34 years old, and for my entire adult life, my family treated me like an absolute failure. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives who thought they could step all over you. The dining room of my parents' house in suburban Chicago smelled of roasted turkey, expensive pine candles, and suffocating judgment. The mahogany table was set with the fine china my mother Patricia only brought out to impress guests. Tonight, there were no guests. It was just family. Yet the performance of wealth and superiority was in full swing. I sat quietly at the end of the table. I watched my father Richard carve the turkey with practiced precision. Across from me sat my younger sister Vanessa and her husband Jamal. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black velvet box. I placed it gently on the pristine white tablecloth and pushed it toward the center of the table. It slid to a stop right next to my mother's crystal wine glass. The room went completely silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Patricia looked down at the box. She did not reach for it. Instead, she pulled her hands back and rested them in her lap. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped against her silk napkin. She looked at the box with deep disgust, then slowly raised her eyes to look at me. "Are you serious right now, Rachel?" Patricia asked. Her voice was sharp and loud, echoing in the quiet room. "You come here on a holiday to eat our food and drink our wine, and you think presenting some cheap little trinket makes up for it." I did not say a word. I just sat back in my chair and watched her. "You are a 34-year-old freeloader," Patricia continued, her tone dripping with venom. "You cannot even afford a decent place to live. Every single year you show up here hoping for a handout or a free meal. You have absolutely nothing to your name. Look at your sister. Vanessa is 32 and she is already running a top-tier real estate firm. She is building a massive empire. And what are you doing? You are pushing papers at some boring desk job trying to hand me a discount store necklace to buy my affection." Richard dropped the carving knife onto the silver platter with a loud clatter. He pointed a finger directly at me across the table. "Your mother is absolutely right," my father barked. "We are tired of your constant neediness. We do not need your fake apologies. We do not need whatever cheap costume jewelry you found on the clearance rack. Take your pathetic little box and get out of my house. We want to enjoy our holiday in peace." Jamal leaned back in his heavy wooden chair. As an African-American man who managed a luxury car dealership downtown, Jamal always loved to flaunt his supposed wealth. He loved nothing more than joining forces with my parents to humiliate me. It made him feel secure in his position as part of the golden couple. He adjusted the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist and let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Come on, guys," Jamal said with a wide smirk. "Go easy on her. Look at what she is wearing. She probably saved up her minimum wage paycheck for 6 months, just to buy the velvet box itself. It is hard out there for a regular employee." He gestured dismissively toward my simple tailored charcoal blazer. Not everyone can afford to walk into a room wearing a $5,000 Prada dress like my beautiful wife. Vanessa smiled smugly and smoothed the fabric of her designer dress. She leaned into Jamal, resting her hand on his chest. "It is okay, babe," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Rachel just does not understand how the real world works. She has always been jealous of our success. We should just let her leave before she embarrasses herself even more." They all stared at me, waiting for the reaction they had grown so used to seeing over the years. They expected me to lower my head in shame. They expected me to cry. They expected me to grab my things and run out the front door so they could spend the rest of the evening laughing at my expense. Instead, I slowly reached out and pulled the black velvet box back across the table. I kept my movements deliberate and calm. I did not break eye contact with my mother as I pressed the small metal latch. The lock clicked loudly in the tense silence of the dining room. I lifted the lid. There was no necklace inside. There were no cheap earrings or clearance rack bracelets. I reached into the box and pulled out a neatly folded legal document. The paper was thick and heavy. I unfolded it once, smoothing the crease against the tablecloth. The bright red stamp of the county clerk was clearly visible on the top right corner. The bold black letters across the top of the page commanded immediate attention. It was a formal notice of foreclosure. I looked at my mother, who was staring at the red stamp with a sudden flicker of confusion. Then I looked at my father, whose face was beginning to turn a dark shade of red. Finally, I looked at Vanessa and Jamal, who were still wearing their arrogant smirks, completely oblivious to what was happening. "I am not here for dinner," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of emotion. "And I am certainly not here to ask for a handout." I placed the document right in the middle of the table next to the carved turkey. "I am here to collect rent." Patricia snatched the heavy parchment from the center of the table. The crystal water glasses rattled as she yanked the document toward her chest with manic energy. Her eyes darted frantically across the bold black text. I watched the color drain completely from her meticulously powdered face. She blinked rapidly as if the words would magically rearrange themselves if she simply refused to accept them. Her perfectly manicured fingers began to tremble. "What is this nonsense?" Patricia demanded. Her voice lacked its usual arrogant bite. It was a breathless, panicked whisper. She shoved the paper toward my father, almost knocking over a silver candlestick. "Richard, look at this. This is some kind of sick joke. She brought fake legal papers to ruin our dinner." Richard snatched the document from her hands. He forcefully shoved his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose. His face shifted from mild confusion to absolute fury in a matter of seconds. The veins in his neck bulged against his stiff white collar. He slammed his fist down on the mahogany table hard enough to make the silverware jump off the china plates. "Notice of foreclosure!" Richard shouted, his voice booming off the vaulted ceiling. "Are you out of your mind, Rachel? We own this house outright. I paid off this mortgage 10 years ago. You march in here on a holiday with fake legal documents to terrorize your mother. I am calling the police right now. You are going to spend the rest of the night in a jail cell for fraud." I did not flinch. I reached for my wine glass. The crystal stem felt cool and solid in my hand. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the Cabernet, savoring the rich flavor, before I bothered to answer him. "You paid off the original mortgage 10 years ago, Dad," I said. "That is entirely true. But we both know that is not the whole story. What you are holding in your shaking hand is the default notice on the second mortgage." The dining room went completely still. The festive holiday music playing softly in the background suddenly sounded absurdly out of place. Even Jamal stopped adjusting his heavy gold Rolex. He sat frozen in his chair, staring at his father-in-law. "You remember the second mortgage, do you not?" I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. "The $2 million loan you quietly took out against this very property exactly 3 years ago. The exact same month I came to you asking for a $20,000 loan to jumpstart my first business venture. You looked me right in the eye in this very room. You told me you were living on a fixed income. You swore you did not have a single dime to spare for my pipe dreams. You told me to go get a second job if I wanted to play entrepreneur." Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at Vanessa with wide, panicked eyes. "But you did have a dime," I said, standing up slowly to assert control over the room. "You had 2 million of them. You signed away the equity of your fully paid-off home to hand a massive lump sum of cash to Vanessa. You funded her quote-unquote real estate startup without asking for a single business plan. You risked your entire financial future to buy her a CEO title because you wanted to brag to your wealthy country club friends about your youngest daughter, the brilliant mogul." Jamal let out a loud, arrogant scoff. He crossed his muscular arms over his chest, trying to reclaim the superiority he felt slipping away. "So what if they did?" Jamal said, a nasty sneer forming on his face. "They made a smart investment. Vanessa is closing massive commercial deals left and right downtown. That $2 million was seed money for a legitimate enterprise. They believed in a proven winner instead of throwing cash down the drain on whatever pathetic little project you were begging for. You are just bitter because they put their money behind the daughter with actual talent and market value. Vanessa nodded eagerly, her confidence returning. She smoothed the fabric of her expensive designer dress and sat up straighter, giving me a look of pure pity. Exactly, Vanessa chimed in. It was a strategic business loan, Rachel. We are generating massive revenue. It takes serious capital to build a real estate empire. You would not understand high-level finance because you have never operated on my level. Mom and Dad will get every single penny back with aggressive interest. You are just throwing a jealous tantrum with a printed piece of paper you made at a local copy shop. You are embarrassing yourself. I placed my wine glass back on the table. The sharp clink of the glass hitting the wood echoed like a gavel strike. Generating revenue. I repeated, arching an eyebrow. Is that what you call missing 6 consecutive mortgage payments? Because the bank calls that a default, Vanessa. They call that a severe breach of contract. Your parents are bleeding dry to cover your failures, and you are sitting here wearing a $5,000 dress. Richard stood up abruptly, pushing his heavy chair back so hard it scraped violently against the polished hardwood floor. He pointed a shaking, angry finger right at my face. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat, Richard yelled. His face was now a dangerous shade of crimson. Even if we missed a few minor payments, that is a private financial matter between me and Chase Bank. It has absolutely nothing to do with you. You have zero legal standing to walk into my house and serve me with a foreclosure notice. Chase Bank holds the deed to this property. They are a multi-billion-dollar financial institution. You are a nobody. They would never send a disgruntled, jealous family member to deliver their legal papers. You are bluffing, and I am done indulging this pathetic stunt. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives before delivering the final blow. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out a sleek silver pen, resting it perfectly parallel to my dinner plate. You are absolutely right, Dad, I said, keeping my tone conversational and calm. Chase Bank holds billions in assets. They manage massive global portfolios. And when a high-risk domestic loan goes into default for half a year, they do not waste their time sending polite letters. They bundle that toxic debt and they sell it off to the highest bidder at a steep discount to clear their corporate ledgers. Richard glared at me, breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his holiday sweater. What exactly is your point, Rachel? My point is that your crushing debt is no longer owned by Chase Bank, I said. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the table. My eyes locked onto his, refusing to let him look away. Who do you think bought your distressed debt from Chase yesterday? Richard stared at me for a long, heavy moment. Then he threw his head back and let out a booming, theatrical laugh. He laughed so hard he had to wipe a tear from his eye. Patricia joined in, offering a nervous, high-pitched giggle. Vanessa crossed her arms, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. You bought our debt. Richard chuckled, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. You. A glorified secretary making what, $50,000 a year. Rachel, you drive a 6-year-old Honda. You rent a 1-bedroom box on the wrong side of the city. You cannot even afford to buy a decent Christmas present for your own mother. And you want me to sit here and believe you somehow scraped together millions of dollars to buy distressed real estate portfolios from a major national bank. He leaned across the table, pointing the silver carving fork at my chest. You are a low-level desk clerk, Rachel. You file papers for people who actually matter, people like Vanessa. Stop playing these pathetic games before I call an ambulance to take you to the psychiatric ward. I did not flinch at the carving fork pointed at my heart. I did not raise my voice. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sound echoed sharply against the dining room walls. Until that moment, my family had been so completely absorbed in their own arrogance that they had failed to notice the man standing quietly in the shadows of the front foyer. He stepped into the bright light of the dining room chandelier. He was a mountain of a man wearing a custom-tailored black suit with a discreet earpiece coiled behind his neck. He walked with heavy, silent authority toward the dining table, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Patricia gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. Richard dropped the carving fork onto his plate. Jamal jumped slightly in his chair, his eyes darting to the security guard's massive frame. The guard stopped directly behind my chair. He placed the heavy leather briefcase on the table right next to my wine glass. "Thank you, Marcus," I said without looking at him. "Of course, Ms. Wilson," he replied, his voice a deep, respectful rumble. He stepped back, assuming a protective stance behind me. I spun the briefcase around to face my father. I flicked the brass latches open. The sharp metallic clicks sounded like gunshots in the dead silent room. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of pristine legal documents bound by a heavy black clip. I did not hand them to Richard. I tossed them directly into the center of the table. They landed square on the silver turkey platter. Drops of dark brown gravy splashed onto the crisp white pages and stained the pristine tablecloth. Patricia let out a horrified shriek at the mess, but I kept my eyes locked entirely on my father. "Read the header, Dad," I commanded. My tone left absolutely no room for debate. Richard scrambled for his reading glasses. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped them. He pulled the gravy-stained documents off the platter and began to read aloud, his voice losing all its previous bravado. "Vanguard Wealth Partners." Richard read, his eyes darting frantically across the page. "Asset Acquisition Agreement. Transfer of distressed debt from Chase Financial." He swallowed hard. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. "Authorized and executed by the Chief Executive Officer." Richard mumbled, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Rachel Wilson." "I am not a desk clerk, Dad," I said, leaning back into my chair. "I never was. 10 years ago, when you refused to help me so you could buy Vanessa her first luxury car, I went to work. I started at the absolute bottom of the financial sector. I skipped vacations. I skipped holidays. I skipped every single family dinner where I knew I would just be used as a punching bag to boost your fragile egos." Vanessa stared at me with her mouth hanging open. The smugness was completely wiped from her face. "While you were busy bragging to your country club friends about Vanessa selling overpriced houses to naive buyers, I was building a private equity firm from scratch." I continued, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I am the founder and sole owner of Vanguard Wealth Partners. I manage billions in assets. My firm specializes in liquidating toxic debt from negligent borrowers who think the rules do not apply to them. Borrowers exactly like you." Patricia let out a sharp, trembling gasp. She looked at the cheap velvet box she had mocked earlier, and then looked at the towering security guard standing behind me. The reality of her colossal mistake was finally crashing down on her. Richard dropped the documents onto the table as if they had burned his fingers. He looked at me with a mixture of profound terror and absolute confusion. He had spent his entire life measuring human worth by bank accounts and job titles. Now he was sitting across from a daughter who could buy and sell his entire existence before breakfast. "You own the debt," Richard whispered, running a shaking hand over his balding head. "You actually own our house." "I own the ground you are sitting on," I corrected coldly. "I own the walls around you. I own the roof over your head. You defaulted on a $2 million loan to fund your golden child's fake real estate empire. Now I am calling in the marker." The parents sat completely paralyzed. They were utterly broken by a single stack of paper. But Jamal was not ready to surrender. Jamal could not stand the sight of a woman taking total control of a room, especially a woman he had spent years treating like dirt. His fragile masculinity could not compute this sudden, massive shift in power. Jamal pushed his chair back with a violent screech against the floor. He stood up, towering over the dining table. He slammed both of his massive fists down onto the mahogany wood, making the crystal wine glasses rattle and tip over. Dark red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, bleeding into the fabric like an open wound. "Listen to me, you crazy witch!" Jamal shouted, his voice booming with aggressive rage. "I do not care what fake company name you printed on those papers. You are not going to come into this house and disrespect my wife. You are not going to threaten my family." He leaned across the table, pointing a rigid finger directly at my face. "Vanessa is a real estate mogul," Jamal spat aggressively. "She is the top seller in this entire city, and I manage the highest grossing luxury car dealership in the state. We make more money in a month than your fake little private equity firm makes in a year. You think a $2 million debt scares us? I will write you a check right now and bounce you out onto the street where you belong. Jamal puffed his chest out, glaring down at me with absolute contempt. He thought he was the ultimate protector, the wealthy provider who could make any problem disappear with a stroke of his pen. He had absolutely no idea he had just walked right into my trap. He had absolutely no idea he had just walked right into my trap. Jamal stood there with his chest puffed out like a peacock in a cheap suit. The spilled red wine dripped off the edge of the mahogany table, staining the expensive Persian rug below. But Jamal did not care. He was too busy trying to intimidate me with his sheer physical size. He leaned his heavy frame over the dining table, glaring down at me with absolute contempt. His eyes were wide and manic. He truly believed he was the savior of this family. $2 million. Jamal scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. You think a $2 million debt is supposed to scare us? That is pocket change, Rachel. I can write a check for that right now and not even feel a dent in my bank account. You come in here playing dress-up with your little briefcase, acting like some corporate titan, but you are entirely out of your league. I glanced at my mother. Patricia was gripping the edge of her chair. The color had completely drained from her face just moments ago, but now a faint glimmer of hope returned to her eyes. She looked up at Jamal, as if he were a knight in shining armor. She desperately wanted to believe his boasts. She needed to believe that her golden son-in-law could wave his magic checkbook and make my foreclosure notice disappear. My wife is a real estate queen, Jamal continued, gesturing proudly toward Vanessa. Vanessa adjusted her posture and lifted her chin, basking in his praise. She moves multi-million-dollar commercial properties every single week. And I manage Elite Motors. I move fleets of imported luxury vehicles for the richest people in this city. We are the definition of success. We are untouchable. You are just a sad, lonely woman trying to tear down a happy family because you have absolutely nothing going for yourself. Jamal walked around the edge of the table, stepping closer to my chair. Marcus, my security guard, immediately shifted his weight, ready to intercept, but I raised a single finger to hold him back. I wanted Jamal to keep talking. I wanted him to dig his grave as deep as possible before I pushed him in. Look at you, Jamal sneered, looking me up and down with intense disgust. You are 34 years old and completely alone. You have no husband. You have no kids. You have no man to take care of you. That is what this is really about, is it not? You are just incredibly bitter. He crossed his thick arms over his chest, smirking down at me. A woman without a real man to provide for her always turns crazy and resentful, Jamal declared. You sit alone in your cheap little apartment every single night scrolling through Vanessa's social media. You burn with jealousy because she has a husband who actually spoils her. She has a man who protects her and gives her the lifestyle she deserves. Jamal lifted his left arm and tapped the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist. The diamonds caught the light of the dining room chandelier. I bought this watch in cash, he bragged loudly. Last month I bought my wife a $30,000 Hermes Birkin bag just because it was a Tuesday. I provide for my family. I protect what is mine. You are just a bitter spinster playing corporate games to fill the massive empty void in your pathetic life. Now pick up your fake papers and get out of my house before I throw you out myself. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend my relationship status. I simply let his arrogant words hang in the heavy, suffocating air of the dining room. I looked at the dark red wine still soaking into the white tablecloth. Then I looked slowly up at Jamal. I gave him a calm, terrifying smile. I reached out and signaled Marcus with a slight nod of my head. Marcus immediately stepped forward and unzipped the side compartment of the heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out a single manila folder and handed it to me. It was much thinner than the massive stack of Vanguard mortgage documents I had tossed on the turkey platter, but it was infinitely more dangerous. I slapped the folder down onto the table right over the spilled wine. Printed in bold black ink across the top tab was Jamal's full legal name. Provide for her, I asked, tilting my head slightly. Is that what we are calling it now, Jamal? Because the last time I checked, the general manager of Elite Motors does not pull in nearly enough legitimate commission to afford $30,000 handbags and solid gold watches. Jamal's broad chest deflated slightly. His arrogant smirk faltered. His eyes darted down to the manila folder bearing his name. A sudden flash of panic crossed his face, but he quickly tried to mask it with more anger. "What the hell is that?" Jamal demanded, his voice losing a fraction of its booming volume. "You see, Jamal Vanguard. Wealth Partners does not just buy distressed residential mortgages." I explained, my voice smooth and calculated. "We also audit commercial assets for corporate acquisitions. And when my forensic accounting team audited Elite Motors last week, we noticed some glaring discrepancies in your specific escrow accounts." Vanessa frowned, looking back and forth between me and her husband. Jamal took a slight step back away from the table. The sweat began to bead on his forehead. Specifically, I continued tapping my manicured fingernail against the folder we looked at, the high-end client deposits. The massive cash reserves your wealthy customers put down to secure custom imported vehicles from Germany and Italy. Those deposits are supposed to sit in a secure escrow account until the vehicles are delivered. But your ledgers were full of holes. I flipped the folder open. I pulled out a stack of bank transfers highlighted in bright yellow ink. I spread them out across the table like a deck of playing cards so everyone could see the numbers. "Provide for me," I asked, locking eyes with him. "Like how you provide by embezzling $500,000 in client deposits from your dealership to buy Vanessa's Birkin bags." Jamal froze. The booming, aggressive energy that had filled his massive frame evaporated in a single second. He stood there paralyzed, staring down at the yellow highlighted bank transfers. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The man who had just bragged about his solid gold watch and $30,000 handbags suddenly looked like a terrified child caught with his hand in the cash register. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his tight collar. He slowly lowered his pointing finger and took a hesitant step back from the table. Vanessa saw her husband falter. Her eyes darted from his pale, sweating face to the damning documents resting on the spilled wine. Panic flashed across her perfect features, but she quickly shoved it down, replacing it with a mask of absolute outrage. She pushed her chair back violently and stood up to shield Jamal. "You are lying!" Vanessa screamed. Her voice was shrill and desperate, echoing off the crystal chandelier. "You hacked into his accounts or fabricated these papers. Jamal is simply managing liquid assets. He is moving capital to bridge a temporary gap. That is how high-level finance works, Rachel. You would not understand it because you only know how to read spreadsheets like a mindless drone." I sat perfectly still, letting her manic energy burn itself out. "We do not need to steal anything." Vanessa continued, her voice rising an octave as she desperately tried to control the narrative. "My real estate firm is booming. I am closing a $10 million commercial waterfront deal next Thursday. $10 million, Rachel. Once that commission clears, we are replenishing the escrow accounts and paying off Mom and Dad's mortgage with a massive bonus. We have it all under control. You just barged in here trying to sabotage my business out of sheer petty jealousy." I let out a slow, cold laugh. The sound chilled the room, instantly shutting down her frantic rant. I reached my hand backward, and Marcus immediately placed a second manila folder into my palm. This one was thicker and heavier than the last. I tossed it onto the table so it slid right past the carved turkey and stopped directly in front of my father. Richard stared at it like it was a live explosive device. "There is no $10 million waterfront deal, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice level and precise. "The property you are claiming to purchase is owned by a shell corporation registered in Delaware, a shell corporation that you created using a fake registered agent. You are selling a ghost property to yourself to trick your current investors into thinking you have actual revenue flowing into your accounts." Vanessa stopped breathing. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned stark white. Her perfectly glossed lips parted in silent horror. "My forensic accounting team audited your entire firm last month," I explained, leaning forward to deliver the final killing blow to her fake empire. "We stripped your ledgers down to the studs. You have not sold a single legitimate piece of commercial real estate in over 2 years. You do not have a booming business. You have a textbook Ponzi scheme." Jamal closed his eyes and let out a shaky breath, realizing the full extent of their devastation had been uncovered. He slumped back into his chair, totally defeated. You take massive cash deposits from new investors who think they are buying into luxury commercial developments, I said, directing my words to the entire room so my parents could hear every single dirty detail of their golden child's crimes. Then you take their fresh cash and use it to pay fake returns to your older investors just to keep them quiet. And whatever is left over, you use to fund your designer wardrobe, your luxury vehicles, and your country club memberships. You built an empire out of thin air and stolen money. Richard looked up from the folder. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. He looked at his youngest daughter, the woman he had sacrificed his own home to support. Vanessa, tell me this is a lie. Richard demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and heartbreak. Tell me you did not take my $2 million and put it into an illegal Ponzi scheme. Your $2 million is gone, Dad. I answered for her, watching the reality shatter his world. She burned through your home equity in 6 months to pay off a group of early investors who were threatening to sue her for federal fraud. When your money finally ran out, she convinced Jamal to start embezzling from his dealership escrow to keep the illusion alive. They are completely bankrupt. They owe millions to the bank, millions to private investors, and hundreds of thousands to the dealership. And now Vanguard Wealth Partners owns the debt. You are all entirely at my mercy. The absolute finality of my words crushed the last ounce of fight out of Vanessa. The arrogant real estate mogul vanished, leaving behind a terrified fraudster. Her knees buckled and she collapsed back into her dining chair. She buried her face in her manicured hands and let out a loud, theatrical wail. It was so hard, Vanessa sobbed loudly, her shoulders shaking with dramatic fake tears. The market turned against me. I was under so much pressure to succeed. Everyone expected me to be the golden girl. I was just trying to fix it. I just needed 1 more month to turn it around and make everyone whole again. How could you do this to me, Rachel? How could you come here on Christmas and destroy your own sister? She peeked through her fingers, playing the ultimate victim, hoping to draw out the unconditional sympathy she had manipulated her entire life. And exactly as she planned, Patricia took the bait. My mother completely ignored the staggering mountain of evidence proving her golden daughter had committed federal wire fraud and bankrupted their family. She ignored the fact that her son-in-law was a common thief. Her mind simply rejected the reality that her perfect upper-class world was built on a criminal foundation. Instead, she directed every ounce of her pathological denial and violent rage at the person who had exposed the ugly truth. Patricia grabbed her heavy crystal wineglass filled to the brim with dark red Cabernet. With a feral shriek, she hurled the glass across the table. Marcus lunged forward, but he was a fraction of a second too late. The heavy crystal shattered against my shoulder. The dark red wine exploded across my chest, soaking my crisp white shirt and staining my tailored charcoal blazer. Before I could even react to the stinging impact, Patricia charged around the edge of the table. She shoved Jamal out of the way and lunged at me with a wild, desperate energy. She swung her arm with vicious force and slapped me squarely across the cheek. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the dining room. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned with intense, stinging heat. The metallic taste of blood pooled in the corner of my mouth. Marcus grabbed Patricia by the shoulders, instantly pulling her back and pinning her arms to her sides, preventing a second strike. Patricia thrashed against his massive grip, kicking her feet and screaming like a madwoman. "You are a monster!" Patricia shrieked, her face twisted with a level of pure, unhinged hatred I had never seen before. "You come into my home and tell these vicious, disgusting lies about your sister. You have been trying to ruin her your entire life. You are nothing but a jealous, vindictive liar. You have been a crazy, bitter liar ever since the car crash 15 years ago." I did not flinch. I did not raise a hand to protect myself or cower away from her sudden, violent rage. I simply turned my face slowly back to the center of the room. I raised my fingers to my cheek and wiped away the warm mixture of expensive red wine and my own blood. I looked at the dark red stain on my fingertips, and then looked directly back at my mother. Marcus immediately tightened his grip, pulling Patricia back from the table. She stumbled slightly but refused to back down. She glared at me, waiting for the emotional breakdown she was so used to triggering. "You have been broken and jealous since the day you ruined your own life," Patricia screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the crystal chandelier. "You were 19 years old and completely out of control. You got blindingly drunk at that ridiculous high school reunion party. You stole your father's vintage Porsche right out of our garage and you wrapped it around an oak tree at 90 miles an hour." She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face twisted with a level of pure, unhinged hatred I had never seen before. "You almost killed your own sister that night." Patricia continued spitting her words like venom. Vanessa was in the passenger seat. She had to drag herself out of the wreckage with a fractured wrist while you were passed out behind the wheel, reeking of cheap tequila. "You brought absolute shame to this entire family. You made us a laughingstock at the country club. You racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills and you actually expected us to foot the bill for your reckless criminal behavior. You ruined your own life, Rachel, and you have hated Vanessa ever since." I signaled Marcus with a slight nod. He immediately let go of Patricia and stepped back, assuming his post behind my chair. Instead of crying, I reached up to the collar of my stained charcoal blazer. I unfastened the top 2 buttons of my silk blouse and pulled the fabric aside. Right below my neck, stretching thick and jagged across my collarbone, was a raised white scar. It was an ugly, permanent reminder of shattered glass and crushed metal. The tissue was knotted and uneven, a testament to emergency surgeries and rushed physical therapy. "You called me a disgrace while I was lying in a hospital bed attached to a ventilator," I said, keeping my voice eerily calm. The stark contrast between my quiet tone and her hysterical screaming made the room feel even more tense. I woke up in the intensive care unit completely alone. My chest was crushed. My collarbone was snapped in half. I had a severe concussion and internal bleeding. You and Dad walked into that room not to ask if I was going to survive, but to tell me I was entirely cut off. I traced the edge of the scar with my index finger, making sure neither of my parents could look away. "You refused to pay a single medical bill," I continued. "You told the university administration that I was no longer receiving your financial support. You forced me to drop out of my sophomore year of college, while I was still wearing a rigid neck brace. I spent the next 5 years working overnight shifts at a diner and answering phones at a corporate call center just to pay off the massive debt from a car crash I supposedly caused. That scar is the foundation of my entire company. That pain is exactly what built Vanguard Wealth Partners." Patricia snapped, adjusting her pearl necklace, trying to regain her regal composure. She lifted her chin defiantly. "You did cause it," Patricia retorted. "The police found you in the driver's seat. You were legally intoxicated. We did what any responsible parent in our social circle would do. We stopped enabling a destructive child. We showed you tough love so you would learn a harsh lesson about consequences." "Tough love," I repeated, letting the words hang heavily in the air. "You funded Vanessa's entire life from the moment she was born. You bought her imported cars. You paid for her luxury apartments in the city. You handed her $2 million of your own home equity to play pretend businesswoman and secretly fund her illegal Ponzi scheme. But you let me drown in medical debt because I was the convenient family scapegoat. I was the perfect place to dump all the blame so your golden child could keep her spotless reputation." I glanced over at Vanessa. She was sitting unusually quiet. Her dramatic sobbing had completely stopped. She was staring blankly at the mahogany table, her face drained of all color. Her hands were shaking violently in her lap. "Do not dare bring Vanessa into your sordid history," Richard barked, stepping up to defend his youngest daughter. He slammed his hand on the table again. The police report was perfectly clear. The insurance investigators were absolutely conclusive. You were drunk, you drove, you crashed. End of story. Now pick up your fake mortgage papers and get out of my house before I have you arrested for trespassing and assault. I did not move. I held out my hand without looking away from my mother. Marcus reached inside his suit jacket. He did not pull out another sleek Vanguard portfolio. He pulled out a worn manila envelope that looked entirely out of place among the crisp legal documents scattered across the dining table. He placed it firmly into my open palm. I tossed the faded yellow envelope onto the mahogany table. It landed right next to the red stamped foreclosure notice and the highlighted embezzlement files. The paper was brittle and brown with age. Across the top, the official seal of the State Highway Patrol was stamped in faded blue ink. "That is a 15-year-old classified document," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That is the original unredacted police report filed by the very first responding officer on the scene. The one you thought you buried forever after you paid the local chief of police a massive cash bribe to alter the official public record." Patricia stared at the yellow envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Her breathing hitched. Her hands began to shake all over again. I leaned across the table, closing the distance between us. "Are you sure I was the one driving that night, Mom?" Vanessa let out a strangled gasp. All the blood instantly drained from her face, leaving her ghostly white. The fake tears, the dramatic sobbing, all of it vanished. She looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had just snapped shut. She scrambled backward, knocking her heavy wooden dining chair to the floor with a loud crash. She spun around and bolted toward the arched doorway leading to the grand foyer. She was desperate to escape the dining room, desperate to outrun the ghost of a 15-year-old crime. Marcus did not even need a verbal command. He simply shifted his massive frame, stepping directly into the center of the archway. Vanessa slammed into his chest like a bird hitting a pane of glass. She stumbled backward, gasping for air. Marcus folded his thick arms across his chest, staring down at her with absolute indifference. The exit was completely sealed. "Let me out!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. She clawed at Marcus's jacket, but he remained planted like a brick wall. "Dad, make him move. Dad, call the police." "Sit back down, Vanessa," I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You are not going anywhere. We are going to have a family meeting, and we are going to read this together." I reached across the mahogany table and picked up the faded yellow envelope. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the heavy, frantic breathing of my sister backed into a corner and the soft crinkle of the brittle paper as I slid the original incident report out of the sleeve. "This is the initial field report filed by Officer Thomas Burke at 2:14 in the morning on October 9th, I said, holding the paper up. Officer Burke was a rookie. He was the first unit on the scene of our crash. He arrived before the paramedics, before the tow trucks, and critically before you, Dad. He documented the raw, uncontaminated crime scene. Patricia stared at the paper, her eyes wide and unblinking. She shook her head slowly, side to side, rejecting the reality unfolding in front of her. "That is impossible," Patricia whispered, her voice trembling. "The police chief personally handed us the final report. He assured us it was accurate. He handed you a sanitized piece of fiction, Mom," I corrected her. "Let us look at what Officer Burke actually found." I lowered my eyes to the faded typewritten text and began to read aloud. "Upon arrival at the scene, I observed a silver Porsche 911 wrapped around an oak tree on the passenger side. The passenger side door was completely crushed inward. The driver's side door was open. I observed two female victims. The older female was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious and unresponsive, with massive blunt force trauma to the chest and a compound fracture of the right clavicle. The younger female was standing outside the vehicle, conscious, with a fractured left wrist and minor lacerations. I paused and looked up at Vanessa. She was pressing her back against the dining room wall, hugging her arms around her chest, shaking uncontrollably. Jamal was staring at his wife, his mouth slightly open, finally realizing the woman he married was a sociopath. "Do you want to know the forensic details, Vanessa?" I asked, taking a step toward her. "Do you want to hear how Officer Burke noted the blood spatter patterns? Because according to his notes, my blood, the blood from my crushed collarbone, was smeared across the passenger seat console and the center gear shift. It was smeared in a long, continuous streak leading directly into the driver's seat." I turned back to my parents, forcing them to look at me. Officer Burke also noted that the driver's seat was pulled so far forward that my knees were crushed against the dashboard. I am 5'10". Vanessa is 5'4". There is physically no way I could have been driving that car in that seat position. But it perfectly fits a panicked, intoxicated 17-year-old girl who stole her father's sports car. You are making this up, Richard yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. You fabricated a fake police report to blackmail us. You are trying to extort this family because you are bankrupt and bitter. I ignored him and kept reading from the brittle page. Officer Burke administered a breathalyzer test to the conscious minor at the scene. I read, my voice ringing with absolute authority. The minor registered a .14 blood alcohol content. She was highly intoxicated, underage, and hysterical. She repeatedly stated to the officer, "I did not mean to crash. I am so sorry, my dad is going to kill me." I dropped the paper back onto the table right on top of Vanessa's fake real estate documents. "I was not driving that night," I said, looking directly into my mother's eyes. "I was passed out in the passenger seat. Vanessa took your keys. Vanessa got drunk. Vanessa lost control of the car and smashed the passenger side into a tree, nearly killing me on impact. And then while I was bleeding out and unconscious, my sweet, loving little sister dragged my broken body over the center console and shoved me behind the steering wheel. She dragged me into the driver's seat to take the fall, because she knew she was facing felony DUI charges and jail time. She sacrificed my life to save her own." Patricia gasped, bringing both hands up to cover her mouth. She looked at Vanessa. Vanessa could not meet her eyes. The golden child stared down at the Persian rug, tears streaming silently down her face. She did not deny it. She did not scream that it was a lie. Her absolute silence was the loudest confession in the world. "I spent 5 years paying off medical debt," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady hum. "I dropped out of college. I worked overnight shifts with a metal plate screwed into my chest. You called me a disgrace. You told your country club friends I was an alcoholic. You let me carry the weight of a felony record that I did not commit because you wanted to protect your precious golden girl. You let me suffer for 15 years. Richard slammed his fists onto the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "That document is a complete fabrication," Richard bellowed, his chest heaving. "It is a fake. The official report states you were driving. The insurance company settled it based on the official report. You cannot just walk in here with a forged piece of paper and rewrite history. I will have my lawyers bury you for this, Rachel. I will have you locked up for fraud." I looked at my father. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead and the frantic, desperate panic in his eyes. He was not angry because he thought the document was fake. He was angry because he knew exactly what it was. I stared at him with dead eyes, feeling absolutely nothing for the man who had ruined my life. "How much did you pay Chief Miller to alter the final report, Dad?" Richard's face lost all its color. The aggressive red flush of his anger vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly gray pallor. His knees gave out. He collapsed backward into his heavy mahogany dining chair, as if the bones in his legs had suddenly turned to dust. He stared at the yellow envelope with wide, unblinking eyes, unable to tear his gaze away from the State Highway Patrol seal. I leaned closer, resting my hands flat on the table. "You thought you buried this forever, did you not, Dad? You thought a fat stack of cash and a firm handshake in the locker room of the Oak Ridge Country Club was all it took to erase a felony. Chief Robert Miller was your regular Saturday morning golf partner. He liked expensive cigars, and he had a gambling problem you were all too happy to quietly fund. When you got the call that night from the hospital, when you realized your precious Vanessa was facing mandatory jail time for a drunk driving crash that nearly killed me, you did not hesitate. You drove straight to the police station. You walked into Chief Miller's private office and you bought my future. You paid him to bury Officer Burke's initial field report and replace it with a sanitized version. You paid him to switch the driver and the passenger. You paid him to turn your innocent, bleeding daughter into a drunk driving criminal just so Vanessa could keep her spotless record and her acceptance letter to Princeton." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but he was trembling so badly his jaw simply snapped shut. He looked down at his shaking hands, unable to look me in the eye. "We had to protect her," Patricia suddenly blurted out. Her voice was shrill and cracking with a bizarre mix of guilt and vicious defensiveness. She was gripping the edge of her chair so hard her knuckles were white. Vanessa had her entire life ahead of her. She had the Ivy League. She had the sorority connections. A felony conviction would have destroyed her. You were already rebellious, Rachel. You were attending that cheap state school. Your reputation was not as important as hers. We made a choice to protect the family legacy. I turned my head and locked eyes with my mother. The sheer sociopathic calculation of her words hung in the suffocating air of the dining room. You protected the family legacy by throwing me into a wood chipper, I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. You left me to wake up in a hospital bed with a crushed chest and a shattered collarbone, facing criminal charges for a crash I did not commit. You told the insurance companies I was driving drunk, so they denied every single medical claim. You left me with $100,000 in medical debt. I pushed myself away from the table and began to pace the length of the dining room. Every step I took sounded like a hammer strike against the hardwood floor. While you were busy protecting Vanessa's bright future, I was busy trying to survive. I spent my entire 20s working 3 minimum wage jobs. I scrubbed floors at a downtown diner until 2 in the morning. I answered phones at a soul-crushing call center. I restocked shelves at a grocery store. I did all of that with a collarbone that never healed properly because I could not afford the physical therapy. I carried trays of heavy dishes while my shoulders screamed in agony. I lived in a freezing, roach-infested apartment, avoiding collection agencies that called me every single day, threatening to garnish the pathetic wages I was killing myself to earn. I stopped pacing and stood directly behind Vanessa's chair. She flinched away from me, pulling her shoulders up to her ears. "And what were you doing while I was drowning in $100,000 of debt?" I asked, staring down at the top of her perfectly styled hair. "You were posting pictures from your European vacations. I saw the photos online, Vanessa. I saw you and Mom smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower, sipping champagne. I saw the videos of Dad treating you to private ski lessons in the Swiss Alps. You spent thousands of dollars on luxury resorts and first-class flights, while I was choosing between buying groceries and paying for my pain medication. You lived a life of absolute luxury funded by the parents who sacrificed me to buy your freedom." Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut and clamped her hands over her ears as if she could physically block out the truth. "We gave you a chance to build character," Richard muttered. It was a pathetic, weak attempt to justify his cowardice. His voice lacked any of the booming authority he had displayed just 10 minutes earlier. "You learned the value of hard work. Look at you now. You are successful. You built your own company. You should be thanking us for pushing you to become independent." I stared at my father. I looked at his expensive, tailored suit, his graying hair, his cowardly, slumping posture. He actually believed his own sick rationalizations. He truly believed he had done me a favor by destroying my life. "Thank you," I repeated. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "You think I built Vanguard Wealth Partners because of your tough love. I built my empire out of pure survival instinct because I knew the people who brought me into this world would gladly watch me die if it meant protecting their own status. I survived in spite of you, Dad, not because of you." The room was entirely silent again. The heavy, crushing weight of their exposed crimes pressed down on my parents and my sister. They had nothing left to say. The illusions they had maintained for 15 years were shattered beyond repair. They thought the worst was over. They thought the revelation of the police report was the bottom of the abyss. I turned back to the table and signaled Marcus with a sharp flick of my wrist. Marcus immediately unzipped the final compartment of his leather briefcase. He pulled out a single crisp piece of paper and handed it to me. It was not faded or brittle like the police report. It was a freshly printed document bearing the official logo of my father's primary banking institution. "You think throwing me under the bus to save Vanessa was the absolute lowest point of your parenting career?" I said, holding the bank statement between my fingers. "You think walking away while I drowned in medical debt was your ultimate sin?" Richard looked up at the paper in my hand. His eyes widened slightly, but he was too paralyzed by fear to speak. "But wait, there is more," I said, flashing a cold, lifeless smile. "You did not just cover it up, Dad. You profited off my broken bones." Jamal froze. The booming, aggressive energy that had filled his massive frame evaporated in a single second. He stood there paralyzed, staring down at the yellow highlighted bank transfers. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The man who had just bragged about his solid gold watch and $30,000 handbags suddenly looked like a terrified child caught with his hand in the cash register. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his tight collar. He slowly lowered his pointing finger and took a hesitant step back from the table. Vanessa saw her husband falter. Her eyes darted from his pale, sweating face to the damning documents resting on the spilled wine. Panic flashed across her perfect features, but she quickly shoved it down, replacing it with a mask of absolute outrage. She pushed her chair back violently and stood up to shield Jamal. "You are lying," Vanessa screamed. Her voice was shrill and desperate, echoing off the crystal chandelier. "You hacked into his accounts or fabricated these papers. Jamal is simply managing liquid assets. He is moving capital to bridge a temporary gap. That is how high-level finance works, Rachel. You would not understand it because you only know how to read spreadsheets like a mindless drone." I sat perfectly still, letting her manic energy burn itself out. "We do not need to steal anything," Vanessa continued, her voice rising an octave as she desperately tried to control the narrative. "My real estate firm is booming. I am closing a $10 million commercial waterfront deal next Thursday. $10 million, Rachel. Once that commission clears, we are replenishing the escrow accounts and paying off Mom and Dad's mortgage with a massive bonus. We have it all under control. You just barged in here trying to sabotage my business out of sheer petty jealousy." I let out a slow, cold laugh. The sound chilled the room, instantly shutting down her frantic rant. I reached my hand backward and Marcus immediately placed a second manila folder into my palm. This one was thicker and heavier than the last. I tossed it onto the table so it slid right past the carved turkey and stopped directly in front of my father. Richard stared at it like it was a live explosive device. "There is no $10 million waterfront deal, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice level and precise. "The property you are claiming to purchase is owned by a shell corporation registered in Delaware. A shell corporation that you created using a fake registered agent. You are selling a ghost property to yourself to trick your current investors into thinking you have actual revenue flowing into your accounts." Vanessa stopped breathing. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly, her knuckles turned stark white. Her perfectly glossed lips parted in silent horror. "My forensic accounting team audited your entire firm last month," I explained, leaning forward to deliver the final killing blow to her fake empire. "We stripped your ledgers down to the studs. You have not sold a single legitimate piece of commercial real estate in over 2 years. You do not have a booming business. You have a textbook Ponzi scheme." Jamal closed his eyes and let out a shaky breath, realizing the full extent of their devastation had been uncovered. He slumped back into his chair, totally defeated. "You take massive cash deposits from new investors who think they are buying into luxury commercial developments," I said, directing my words to the entire room so my parents could hear every single dirty detail of their golden child's crimes. "Then you take their fresh cash and use it to pay fake returns to your older investors just to keep them quiet. And whatever is left over you use to fund your designer wardrobe, your luxury vehicles, and your country club memberships. You built an empire out of thin air and stolen money." Richard looked up from the folder. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. He looked at his youngest daughter, the woman he had sacrificed his own home to support. "Vanessa, tell me this is a lie," Richard demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and heartbreak. "Tell me you did not take my $2 million and put it into an illegal Ponzi scheme." "Your $2 million is gone, Dad," I answered for her, watching the reality shatter his world. "She burned through your home equity in 6 months to pay off a group of early investors who were threatening to sue her for federal fraud. When your money finally ran out, she convinced Jamal to start embezzling from his dealership escrow to keep the illusion alive. They are completely bankrupt. They owe millions to the bank, millions to private investors, and hundreds of thousands to the dealership. And now Vanguard Wealth Partners owns the debt. You are all entirely at my mercy." The absolute finality of my words crushed the last ounce of fight out of Vanessa. The arrogant real estate mogul vanished, leaving behind a terrified fraudster. Her knees buckled and she collapsed back into her dining chair. She buried her face in her manicured hands and let out a loud theatrical wail. "It was so hard," Vanessa sobbed loudly, her shoulders shaking with dramatic fake tears. "The market turned against me. I was under so much pressure to succeed. Everyone expected me to be the golden girl. I was just trying to fix it. I just needed one more month to turn it around and make everyone whole again. How could you do this to me, Rachel? How could you come here on Christmas and destroy your own sister? She peeked through her fingers, playing the ultimate victim, hoping to draw out the unconditional sympathy she had manipulated her entire life. And exactly as she planned, Patricia took the bait. My mother completely ignored the staggering mountain of evidence proving her golden daughter had committed federal wire fraud and bankrupted their family. She ignored the fact that her son-in-law was a common thief. Her mind simply rejected the reality that her perfect upper-class world was built on a criminal foundation. Instead, she directed every ounce of her pathological denial and violent rage at the person who had exposed the ugly truth. Patricia grabbed her heavy crystal wine glass filled to the brim with dark red Cabernet. With a feral shriek, she hurled the glass across the table. Marcus lunged forward, but he was a fraction of a second too late. The heavy crystal shattered against my shoulder. The dark red wine exploded across my chest, soaking my crisp white shirt and staining my tailored charcoal blazer. Before I could even react to the stinging impact, Patricia charged around the edge of the table. She shoved Jamal out of the way and lunged at me with a wild, desperate energy. She swung her arm with vicious force and slapped me squarely across the cheek. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the dining room. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned with intense, stinging heat. The metallic taste of blood pooled in the corner of my mouth. Marcus grabbed Patricia by the shoulders, instantly pulling her back and pinning her arms to her sides, preventing a second strike. Patricia thrashed against his massive grip, kicking her feet and screaming like a madwoman. "You are a monster," Patricia shrieked, her face twisted with a level of pure, unhinged hatred I had never seen before. "You come into my home and tell these vicious, disgusting lies about your sister. You have been trying to ruin her your entire life. You are nothing but a jealous, vindictive liar. You have been a crazy, bitter liar ever since the car crash 15 years ago." Richard's jaw opened and closed, but no sound came out. The booming, aggressive energy that had filled his massive frame evaporated in a single second. He stood there, paralyzed, staring down at the faded police report. The aggressive red flush of his anger vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly gray pallor. His knees gave out. He collapsed backward into his heavy mahogany dining chair as if the bones in his legs had suddenly turned to dust. I leaned closer, resting my hands flat on the table. "You thought you buried this forever, did you not, Dad? You thought a stack of cash and a firm handshake in the locker room of the Oak Ridge Country Club was all it took to erase a felony. Chief Miller was your regular Saturday morning golf partner. When you got the call that night from the hospital when you realized your precious Vanessa was facing mandatory jail time for a drunk driving crash that nearly killed me, you did not hesitate. You bought my future. You paid him to turn your innocent bleeding daughter into a drunk driving criminal just so Vanessa could keep her spotless record. We had to protect her," Patricia blurted out. Her voice was shrill and cracking with a bizarre mix of guilt and vicious defensiveness. Vanessa had her entire life ahead of her. "You were already rebellious, Rachel. We made a choice to protect the family legacy." I turned my head and locked eyes with my mother. "You protected the family legacy by throwing me into a wood chipper," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. "You left me with $100,000 in medical debt. I spent my entire 20s working 3 minimum wage jobs. I scrubbed floors at a downtown diner until 2 in the morning. I restocked shelves at a grocery store. I did all of that with a collarbone that never healed properly because I could not afford the physical therapy." I stopped pacing and stood directly behind Vanessa's chair. "And what were you doing while I was drowning in debt?" I asked. "You were posting pictures from your European vacations. You spent thousands of dollars on luxury resorts while I was choosing between buying groceries and paying for my pain medication." "We gave you a chance to build character," Richard muttered. I stared at my father. "You think throwing me under the bus to save Vanessa was the absolute lowest point of your parenting career. You think walking away while I drowned in medical debt was your ultimate sin." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a freshly printed bank document. I slid the bank statement across the table. It drifted over the polished mahogany and stopped right over a puddle of spilled wine, absorbing the dark red liquid into its crisp white edges. This is a wire transfer receipt from Pacific Standard Insurance, dated exactly 14 years ago. I said, my voice carrying the sharp clinical precision of an executioner. $500,000. That was the maximum payout on the catastrophic injury policy you held in my name. The money was supposed to cover my emergency chest surgeries, my physical therapy, and the permanent nerve damage in my shoulder. But I never saw a single cent of it because you and Mom forged my signature on the settlement release forms. Patricia gasped, pressing both hands flat against her chest, as if she had been physically struck. Richard stared blindly at the paper, his jaw hanging slack. Instead of paying the hospital to fix the body, your golden child broke you, pocketed my blood money, I said, stepping closer to the table. And exactly 3 weeks after that massive deposit hit your offshore account, you wired $450,000 to a luxury real estate developer. You bought Vanessa and Jamal their beautiful 5-bedroom starter home in the Hamptons. You literally purchased your favorite daughter's domestic bliss using the shattered pieces of my skeleton. Jamal turned slowly to look at his wife. He had been standing near the archway, completely humiliated by the revelation of Vanessa's fake real estate documents, but this new horror struck him on an entirely different visceral level. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sick and hollow. You told me your parents cashed out some mutual funds to give us that house, Jamal said, his voice vibrating with absolute shock. He looked at Vanessa as if her skin was crawling with maggots. You told me it was an early inheritance. You swore to me it was clean money. Jamal, please, Vanessa begged, reaching a trembling, manicured hand out toward him. I did not know the exact details. Dad just handled the family finances. I swear I thought it was just an investment gift. Do not touch me, Jamal barked, slapping her hand away with brutal force. He stumbled backward, retreating until his broad shoulders hit the cold plaster of the hallway wall. He looked from Vanessa to Patricia and finally settled his furious gaze on Richard. His expression twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. I sleep in a master bedroom bought with her crushed bones. I eat breakfast at a kitchen island paid for by her medical debt. You people are sick. You are absolutely clinically insane. I am done. I am completely, entirely done with all of you. Jamal turned on his heel and marched straight out the front door. The heavy oak slammed shut behind him with a deafening crack that rattled the expensive crystal artwork hanging in the grand foyer. The villainous united front had completely shattered. Vanessa fell to her knees on the Persian rug, sobbing hysterically, as the reality of her husband walking out crashed down on her shoulders. Richard watched his son-in-law abandon them, and the last remaining shred of his arrogant pride evaporated into nothing. The formidable patriarch, the man who controlled every narrative and crushed anyone who opposed him, suddenly looked like a terrified, feeble old man. His chest heaved as sheer panic finally overrode his colossal ego. Rachel, wait, Richard stammered, holding both his hands up in a pathetic, placating gesture. He practically threw himself across the mahogany table, leaning toward me with wide, desperate eyes. We can fix this. We can make it right. You are my daughter. We are family. Family makes mistakes, but family forgives. We will pay you back every single dollar. I will give you equity in my firm. Just tell me your price. Patricia eagerly joined his frantic pleading. Genuine tears streamed down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her expensive mascara and leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. But they were not tears of remorse for what she had done to me. They were tears of pure terror. She was terrified of losing her country club memberships, her luxury winter vacations, and her untouchable high society status. Yes, darling, yes! Patricia cried out, her voice cracking into a pitiful screech. We will sell the Mercedes. We will sell the summer boat. We will sell whatever we have to. Just please do not go to the police. Do not take our home. We will welcome you back into the family with open arms. We will host a massive dinner and tell everyone how proud we are of your success. You can have your old bedroom back. You can have anything you want. I stared at the two of them, begging and weeping. A hollow, bitter laugh escaped my throat, echoing loudly in the high-ceilinged room. "Welcome me back with open arms," I repeated, shaking my head slowly. "You want to welcome me back now that I hold the deed to your entire miserable existence? Where were those open arms on Thanksgiving 6 years ago? Where were those warm embraces every single Christmas while I sat completely alone in a freezing 200-square-foot studio apartment in Queens?" I slammed my fist onto the table, causing the silverware to jump and making my mother flinch violently. I spent the holidays eating cups of 90-cent instant noodles while wrapped in 3 cheap fleece blankets because I could not afford to turn on the radiator. I shouted, my voice vibrating with 15 years of suppressed boiling rage. I sat in the dark, icing my throbbing shoulder while I scrolled through Facebook on a cracked phone screen. "I saw your posts, Mom." I saw the high-resolution pictures of the massive roasted turkeys and the vintage champagne. I saw the comments you left for your country club friends, claiming I was too busy finding myself to join the family celebration. I saw Vanessa mocking my cheap clothes and calling me a bitter dropout online. You isolated me. You starved me. You laughed at my misery while living in absolute luxury funded by my stolen blood money. "But Rachel, please," Richard whined, his voice cracking into a pathetic wheeze. "We will sign this house over to you right now. You can have it. Just forgive the Vanguard debt. Please let us walk away from this." I stepped around the edge of the table and walked directly up to my father. I leaned in close, resting my palms flat on the wood until my face was only inches from his sweating, terrified face. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the sour, undeniable stench of his fear. "You think this is just about the house? Dad, did you ever read the cross-default clause in your pension fund contract?" Richard stopped breathing. The muscles in his neck strained as he stared up at me. His arrogant facade had been entirely stripped away, leaving only a terrified shell of a man. His mouth opened and closed silently like a fish suffocating on dry land. I stepped back and allowed the heavy, crushing silence to stretch across the dining room. Marcus stepped forward and handed me a sleek black tablet. I tapped the screen once to wake it up and placed it flat on the mahogany table right in front of my father. "What is this?" Richard whispered. His voice was completely devoid of its usual booming authority. It was thin and reedy. "That is a real-time snapshot of your financial existence," I said. 3 months ago, Vanguard Wealth Partners executed a highly aggressive hostile takeover of a company called Apex Financial. Does that name ring a bell, Dad? It absolutely should. Apex Financial is the firm that has managed your entire corporate pension and your personal retirement portfolio for the last 30 years. Richard let out a strangled gasp. He reached for the tablet with trembling fingers, but he could not bring himself to touch the glowing screen. "When my firm acquired Apex, we conducted a comprehensive review of all high net worth accounts." I continued, pacing slowly around the dining table. "We looked at everything, and what my forensic auditors found was absolutely fascinating. We discovered that 3 years ago, you took out a massive second mortgage on this house. You needed liquidity to keep up your country club memberships, to pay for Mom's luxury vacations, and to quietly bail Vanessa out of her first 2 failed business ventures." Patricia whimpered, covering her mouth with both hands. "But your legitimate income was not high enough to qualify for a loan of that magnitude." "Was it?" I said, locking eyes with my father. "So you got creative. You committed federal mortgage fraud. You drastically inflated your assets on the loan applications. You claimed ownership of commercial properties that Vanessa had already secretly leveraged to the hilt. You lied on federal documents to get your hands on that cash." Richard was hyperventilating now. His hands clutched his chest as if he were trying to keep his heart from exploding out of his ribcage. "You cannot prove that," he stammered. "It was a minor clerical error. My accountant handled those forms. You cannot pin that on me." "Do not insult my intelligence!" I snapped, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses like a serrated blade. "We have your direct emails instructing your accountant to alter the numbers. We have the metadata. We have absolute, undeniable proof of federal fraud. And that brings us back to that cross-default clause." I stopped pacing and stood directly behind Patricia, watching her shrink away from me in her chair. A standard cross default clause stipulates that if you default on one financial obligation or commit fraud to obtain it, your lender has the legal right to seize your other assets to cover the debt. I explained, maintaining a calm, clinical tone that I knew was tearing their reality apart. Since Vanguard Wealth Partners now owns both your fraudulent mortgage debt and the firm managing your pension, we exercised our legal rights this morning. Richard finally looked down at the tablet. The screen displayed his primary retirement account balances. The numbers that had once represented millions of dollars of security, the safety net he had spent his entire life building, now sat at zero. It is gone. Richard wheezed, tears finally spilling over his eyelids and tracking down his pale cheeks. My entire life savings, my pension, my investments. You took everything. I took nothing, I corrected sharply. You forfeited it the moment you committed federal fraud to maintain your pathetic illusion of wealth. I simply executed the terms of the contract you signed. The money was seized to cover your defaulted loans and the massive penalties you accrued. You are completely, utterly penniless. You do not own this house. You do not have a retirement fund. You do not even have enough cash to pay for the electricity keeping these chandeliers on. Patricia let out a guttural, agonizing scream. It was not a cry of sorrow or remorse. It was the sound of a shallow, narcissistic woman realizing her entire identity had just been obliterated. She looked at the shattered crystal on the Persian rug. She looked at her expensive silk dress now stained with dark red wine. "We are destitute," Patricia wailed, grabbing Richard by the arm and shaking him violently. "Do something, Richard. Tell her to give it back. Tell her she cannot do this to us. I cannot be poor. I cannot live like those people. My friends will laugh at me. I will be ruined in this town." Richard ignored her. He was staring at the zero on the screen, completely broken. The patriarch who had sacrificed his own daughter to protect a family legacy had just watched that legacy burn to ash. Vanessa, who had been sitting frozen in her chair, suddenly shot up. Her face was streaked with running makeup, but her eyes burned with a manic, delusional defiance. She was backed into a corner, but her profound narcissism would not allow her to accept defeat. She still thought she had an escape route. "You think you have won?" Vanessa screamed, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You think you can destroy me just because you bought some debt? You are nothing but a jealous, sad little girl playing business dress-up. I do not care about this house. I do not care about their pathetic pension." She grabbed her designer purse from the floor and slung it over her shoulder. Her chest heaved as she tried to project an aura of absolute invincibility. "Jamal is just in shock," Vanessa declared, her voice pitching into a hysterical frenzy. "He will come back to me. He loves me. We have our own money. I have offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that your little auditing team could never touch. Millions of dollars safely tucked away in anonymous shell companies. Jamal and I are going to the airport tonight. We are leaving for Dubai. We are going to start over in absolute luxury, and we are never looking back. You can have these two broke losers in this stupid house. I am untouchable." She practically spat the words at me, a desperate attempt to reclaim the superiority she had lorded over me my entire life. She actually believed she could simply buy a first-class ticket and fly away, leaving the wreckage of our family behind. I did not shout. I did not get angry. I just looked at her with a profound, quiet pity that made her manic smile falter. I tilted my head and let a soft, genuine laugh escape my lips. "Check your phone, Vanessa." Vanessa snatched her phone off the polished mahogany table with trembling hands. The facial recognition unlocked the screen, and her manicured fingers flew across the glass, frantically tapping the icon for her offshore banking app. She waited for the Cayman Island accounts to load, her breath hitching in her throat. The screen refreshed. A bright red error message flashed across the top. "Balance zero. Account frozen." "No, no, no," Vanessa muttered, her voice frantic. She swiped out of the app and opened her domestic bank accounts. Her checking account. Her business accounts. Her joint accounts with Jamal. Every single screen displayed the same horrifying message in bold red lettering. "Balance zero. Account frozen by federal order." Vanessa dropped the phone. It clattered against a dessert plate and slid into the puddle of spilled wine. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terror so pure it stripped away every ounce of her manufactured superiority. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice completely hollow. "I did my job," I answered, my tone calm and clinically detached. "Did you really think Vanguard Wealth Partners would just casually acquire a massive debt portfolio without executing a deep forensic dive into the underlying assets? When my auditing team flagged your fraudulent shell companies and the millions of dollars you illegally siphoned out of Jamal's dealership escrow, I did not just sit on that information, Vanessa. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. As a licensed private equity chief executive officer, I have a strict fiduciary and legal obligation to report discovered financial crimes to the proper authorities. I explained, watching the blood drain completely from her face. I handed our entire audited file over to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation 3 days ago. I gave them a perfectly packaged, open and shut case of federal wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. Patricia let out a strangled gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. Richard remained slumped in his chair, staring at the wall like a dead man. His breathing was shallow and uneven, his mind completely broken by the sheer magnitude of the catastrophe. They move incredibly fast when the evidence is handed to them on a silver platter. I continued, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. The FBI secured federal warrants yesterday morning. They froze every single asset attached to your name, Jamal's name, and your fake real estate firm. Those offshore accounts in Dubai and the Cayman Islands that you thought made you untouchable. They are gone, Vanessa. The federal government seized them hours ago. You do not even have enough liquidity to buy a cup of coffee. "You cannot do this to me!" Vanessa shrieked. She grabbed the edges of the table, her knuckles turning white as she tried to heave herself up. Her legs refused to support her, and she slumped heavily against the mahogany wood. "I am your sister. You are ruining my life. We share the same blood." "You ruined your own life!" I fired back, my voice rising with absolute authority. "Your entire existence has been funded by other people's money. You have never built anything real in your life. You are a parasite feeding off anyone foolish enough to trust you. You took Mom and Dad's dirty blood money, the payout from my crushed bones, to buy your first luxury starter home in the Hamptons. When you wanted to play real estate mogul, you stole millions from innocent investors who trusted you with their life savings. You used their hard-earned cash to buy your designer bags, your sports cars, and your first-class tickets to Paris. You lived like a queen while the people you robbed faced financial ruin." Vanessa shook her head side to side, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup and leaving dark streaks across her cheeks. She was hyperventilating, desperately trying to find a way out of a trap that had already snapped shut. "And when that money ran dry, you sank your claws into your husband," I said, pointing toward the hallway where Jamal had stormed out minutes earlier. "You convinced him to embezzle from his own corporate escrow accounts to keep your ridiculous Ponzi scheme afloat. You funded your entire glamorous lifestyle with stolen cash, and now the bill has finally come due. You have absolutely nothing. You are completely and utterly bankrupt." "We can hire lawyers!" Patricia cried out, her voice shaking with desperate delusion. "Richard knows the best defense attorneys in the state. We will fight this. We will get the money back. We have connections in this city." "With what money, Mom?" I asked, turning my cold gaze onto her. "The feds did not just freeze Vanessa's accounts. Because Dad committed federal mortgage fraud and tied his assets to her fraudulent businesses, the SEC froze your accounts too. You cannot afford a public defender, let alone a luxury legal team. Your country club friends will pretend they never knew you. You are all going to face federal indictments, and you are going to do it completely broke." Before Patricia could process the absolute finality of my words, the heavy oak front door violently crashed open. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the grand foyer. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded against the hardwood floor. A second later, Jamal burst back into the dining room. He did not look like the polished, arrogant businessman who had been sipping expensive wine an hour ago. His tie was ripped off. His designer shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his chest was heaving. He was clutching his cell phone so tightly the plastic case looked ready to snap. He had only made it as far as his car in the driveway before his world completely imploded. Vanessa cried out, reaching her hands toward him with a pathetic surge of hope. Jamal, thank God. We have to leave. Rachel called the FBI. They froze my accounts, but we can still take your car and drive to the border. We can still get away. Jamal did not reach back for her. He stared at her with a look of pure, murderous rage. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, and the veins in his thick neck were bulging against his skin. He took a heavy, menacing step into the room, ignoring me, ignoring Richard, and focusing entirely on the woman who had just destroyed his life. My accounts are locked, Jamal growled, his voice vibrating with a dangerous feral energy. I know, baby, I know, Vanessa sobbed, stepping toward him. But we will figure it out. We just need to go right now. You stupid delusional woman, Jamal roared, his voice booming off the high ceiling and causing the crystal chandelier to rattle. He raised his phone and shoved the screen inches from Vanessa's face. The dealership just called me. Federal agents just walked through the front doors of my showroom with a seizure warrant. They are auditing the escrow accounts, Vanessa. The escrow accounts that you swore you were going to replenish last week. Vanessa shrank back, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. They know the money is missing, Jamal shouted, stepping closer and backing her against the mahogany table. They know I wired $3 million of company funds into your fake real estate accounts. I am not going to Dubai, Vanessa. I am going to federal prison. We are both going to federal prison. Jamal threw his phone onto the floor, shattering the screen into a spiderweb of cracked glass. He lunged forward and grabbed Vanessa by the shoulders. The room went dead silent. The ringing in my ear from the slap faded into a sharp crystal clarity. I slowly raised my hand and wiped the smear of metallic-tasting blood from the corner of my mouth. I looked at the bright red stain on my thumb and then shifted my gaze to my mother. She was still panting heavily, still thrashing weakly against Marcus, but her feral energy began to rapidly drain as she saw the absolute dead calm in my eyes. The car crash. I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. You mean the crash where your precious golden child drove her brand new luxury sedan into a concrete barrier while she was 3 times over the legal limit? The crash where I was trapped in the passenger seat with a shattered collarbone and 4 broken ribs? The crash where Dad paid off the local police chief to switch our seats and pin the entire wreck on me so Vanessa would not lose her full-ride university scholarship? Richard let out a sharp, strangled gasp. His face turned the color of wet ash. He slumped forward, gripping the edge of the mahogany table as if the floor had just dropped out from beneath him. You ruined my life to protect hers, I said, stepping closer to my mother, who was suddenly trembling with a new kind of raw emotion. You left me handcuffed to a hospital bed while I was coughing up blood. You saddled me with a criminal record and a mountain of medical debt. You threw me to the wolves so Vanessa could keep playing the perfect daughter, and now you have the absolute audacity to look me in the eye and call me a monster. Patricia stopped fighting. Marcus released his iron grip and she stumbled backward, falling heavily into the dining chair beside my father. The manic defensive rage that had fueled her physical attack completely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by the cold, horrifying realization that I was not bluffing. The thick manila folders, the yellow highlighted bank transfers, the audited ledgers proving Vanessa was a fraud, it was all entirely real. Her flawless upper-class world was completely destroyed. Patricia looked at the puddle of spilled wine soaking into the Persian rug. She looked at her bankrupt golden daughter, who was still sobbing into her hands. Finally, she looked at my bleeding lip. Genuine tears of absolute terror welled up in her eyes. The reality of their financial execution had finally breached her pathological denial. Rachel, please, Richard begged. His deep, authoritative voice cracked into a pathetic, reedy wheeze. He held his trembling hands up toward me. His towering arrogance was entirely gone, leaving behind a frightened, feeble old man. We did not know what else to do back then. We made a terrible mistake. We were just trying to protect the family legacy. We can fix this right now. We can make everything right. Patricia frantically nodded along, fresh tears streaming down her contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup and leaving dark streaks on her cheeks. Yes, darling, yes, she cried out, her voice taking on a sickly sweet, pleading tone that made my stomach violently turn. "We are so sorry. We will do whatever you want. We will sell the Mercedes. We will sell the summer boat. We will sell the vacation timeshares in Florida. We will pay you back every single cent." She grabbed a linen napkin and dabbed at her running mascara. "We can be a family again, Rachel. I will call Aunt Martha and Uncle Frank right now. I will tell them we misjudged you all these years. You can have your old bedroom back. We will redecorate it exactly how you want it. Just do not take our home. Please, I am your mother." Richard leaned over the table, his chest heaving with exertion. "We will issue a public apology, Rachel. We will tell everyone at the country club the truth about the crash. We will clear your name completely. You are our daughter. We want to welcome you back into the family with open arms. We will host a massive dinner in your honor. Just please, I am begging you, forgive the debt. Sign the house back over to us and let us start fresh as a real family." I stood motionless, watching the two people who had destroyed my youth groveling at my feet. A slow, bitter laugh clawed its way up my throat, echoing loudly off the crystal chandelier above us. "Welcome me back with open arms," I repeated, shaking my head slowly. "You want to welcome me back now that I hold the deed to your entire miserable existence. You want to be a real family now that you are staring down the barrel of federal bankruptcy and total public humiliation." I grabbed the edge of the table, leaning over the carved turkey and the scattered silver. "Where were those open arms for the last 15 years?" I demanded, my voice rising with years of suppressed, boiling rage. Where was this desperate need for family when I was 19 years old and facing eviction? Do you have any idea what it is like to sit completely alone in a freezing 200-square-foot studio apartment in Queens on Thanksgiving? The drafty windows rattled every time the subway passed. I spent years eating 90-cent cups of instant noodles while wrapped in 3 cheap fleece blankets because I could not afford to turn on the radiator. I scrubbed diner floors until 2 in the morning with a shoulder that never healed right because you flatly refused to help with my medical bills. Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, crying harder, but I refused to stop. "And what were you doing while I was starving?" I shouted, slamming my fist onto the mahogany wood, causing the plates to violently rattle. "You were posting pictures on Facebook. You posted high-resolution albums of your massive roasted turkeys and your vintage champagne. I sat in the dark reading the comments you left for your country club friends, claiming I was too busy finding myself to join the family celebration. Vanessa tagged you in photos from your ski trips in Aspen and your summer retreats in Monaco. I watched you all clink crystal flutes and toast to family loyalty while I was deciding whether to buy bus fare or a loaf of bread. I watched Vanessa mock my cheap clothes online, calling me a bitter dropout. You isolated me. You starved me. You laughed at my absolute misery while living in total luxury funded by my stolen future. We did not know how bad it was." Richard stammered weakly, wiping cold sweat from his forehead. "We thought you needed tough love. We thought you were building character. Rachel, I am an old man. I have a heart condition. The stress of this will kill me. Take the house. Take the cars. Just please let me keep my retirement. Let your mother and I live out our final years in peace." I stared at my father. He really thought this was the end of it. He truly thought losing his precious Beacon Hill mansion was the ultimate punishment. He still had absolutely no idea just how deep I had buried the knife. I walked slowly around the edge of the table until I was standing right beside his chair. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the sour, undeniable stench of his terror. I leaned down, bringing my face mere inches from his ear. I kept my voice perfectly level and deadly calm. "You think this is just about the house? Dad, did you ever read the cross-default clause in your pension fund contract?" Marcus moved faster than I thought a man his size possibly could. Before Jamal could even shake her, Marcus locked his massive hands onto Jamal's wrists and violently ripped him away from Vanessa. With a single effortless heave, Marcus threw the former college linebacker backward. Jamal stumbled, completely losing his footing, and crashed hard into the edge of the dining table. The impact tipped the heavy silver platter holding Patricia's prized Christmas turkey. The massive bird slid across the polished mahogany, knocking over crystal goblets and sending a tidal wave of dark gravy splashing onto the imported Persian rug. Vanessa shrieked, scrambling backward in her chair to avoid the mess. She pressed her back against the wall, her chest heaving as she stared at the man she had called her soulmate just an hour ago. Jamal did not even look at the destruction he had just caused. He caught his balance, gripping the edge of the gravy-stained table, and locked his wild, desperate eyes on me. The aggressive alpha male posturing was completely eradicated. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap was already closed. "Rachel, listen to me," Jamal pleaded, holding both his hands up in a frantic gesture of surrender. His deep voice trembled, cracking under the crushing weight of his impending federal indictment. I had nothing to do with her fake real estate firm. She lied to me. She told me the money from the dealership escrow was just a temporary bridge loan. She swore the funds would be replaced by the end of the quarter. She manipulated me. She played me just like she played those investors. Vanessa gasped, her jaw dropping in absolute horror. "You lying coward!" she screamed, launching herself out of her chair. Her manicured hands curled into claws as if she wanted to rip his eyes out. "You knew exactly what we were doing. You signed the wire transfers, Jamal. You authorized the withdrawals using your own executive passwords." "Shut your mouth," Jamal roared back, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You told me the commercial waterfront deal was a sure thing. You fed me fake prospectus reports. You did not care where the cash came from as long as it kept flowing." Vanessa shrieked, stepping over the spilled gravy and jabbing her finger into his chest. "Do not stand there and play the innocent victim. You drained an extra $200,000 from the corporate accounts just to cover your sports gambling debts. You bought that ridiculous gold watch on your wrist using stolen investor capital. And do not think I do not know about the apartment you leased downtown for that cocktail waitress you have been hiding for 6 months." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Patricia let out a whimpering gasp, pressing her napkin against her mouth. Richard just stared blankly at the ruined turkey, his mind entirely incapable of processing the absolute disintegration of his flawless family. "You insane, greedy parasite!" Jamal shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You blew $3 million on designer bags, luxury cars, and trips to Monaco just to impress your pathetic country club friends. You stole more from my dealership than I ever touched. You bankrupted us. You ruined my life. I am going to federal prison because I married a sociopath." I sat back in my chair, picking up my fresh glass of wine. I brought the crystal rim to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip, watching the golden couple absolutely tear each other to shreds over the ruins of their Christmas dinner. For 10 years, my mother had paraded Vanessa and Jamal around as the ultimate American success story. They were the brilliant power couple, the flawless standard I was constantly measured against and punished for failing to meet. My parents had framed their marriage as a partnership built on love, ambition, and mutual respect. They used Vanessa's domestic bliss as a weapon to mock my independence and my lonely studio apartment in Queens. But watching them now, I saw the absolute rotting truth. Their perfect marriage was nothing but a transactional arrangement funded by other people's money. The unconditional love they constantly bragged about was entirely conditional on the cash flowing and the facade holding up. The second the money evaporated, the second they faced real consequences, they turned into starved rats trapped in a sinking barrel, biting and clawing at each other to survive. There was no loyalty. There was no love. There was only a desperate, vicious greed. Jamal, realizing that arguing with Vanessa was not going to save him from a federal cage, abruptly turned his back on his wife. He stepped toward me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a sickeningly eager desperation. "Rachel, I can give you everything," Jamal begged, his voice dropping into a frantic, hushed tone. "I know you bought the debt. I know Vanguard Wealth Partners controls the leverage. I can help you crush them completely. I have the secondary ledgers. I kept backups of every single fraudulent transaction Vanessa ever made. I have the offshore routing numbers. I even have the files proving Richard took kickbacks from the city zoning board to push his commercial projects through. I have it all saved on a secure cloud drive." He leaned closer, placing his hands flat on the table right next to the spilled wine. I will turn over everything to your forensic accountants. Jamal promised, his eyes pleading with me to accept his ultimate betrayal. I will testify against Vanessa in open court. I will testify against Richard. I will give the feds everything they need to lock them both away for 20 years. Just let me walk away. Call off the Vanguard lawyers. Tell your private equity board to drop the civil suit against my dealership, and I will hand you the keys to their complete destruction. I let the silence stretch out, allowing his pathetic offer to hang in the air. I looked at Vanessa, who was staring at her husband with an expression of pure venomous hatred. I looked at Richard, who seemed to visibly shrink into his chair as Jamal openly offered to send him to a federal penitentiary. Finally, I looked back at Jamal. I set my wineglass down on the mahogany table with a soft clink. I rested my hands in my lap and offered him a polite, clinical smile. You cannot make deals with me, Jamal, I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. You do not have anything I need. The FBI Cyber Division cracked your cloud drive 3 days ago. They have been manually auditing your dealership's internal servers since 8 o'clock this morning. Did you ever read the cross-default clause in your pension fund contract? Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning bone white as he tried to process the words I had just spoken. My pension is held in an ironclad corporate trust. He stammered, his voice a pathetic, reedy whisper. It is completely insulated. It is protected by federal banking regulations. You cannot touch my retirement, Rachel. No one can touch my retirement. I let out a slow, bitter laugh that echoed harshly off the crystal chandelier above us. You really are incredibly arrogant, I said, stepping closer and looking down at him with absolute clinical detachment. You were so utterly convinced of your own financial invincibility that you did not even bother to read the fine print. 3 years ago, when Vanessa's first fraudulent shell company was struggling with liquidity, she came to you crying for a massive corporate bridge loan. You signed a personal guarantee to secure that capital. You thought it was just a simple formality to keep the banking executives happy while your golden daughter moved her imaginary millions around. Richard began to wheeze, his hand flying up to clutch his chest. Patricia let out a strangled, whimpering gasp, grabbing his arm. But to secure that massive line of credit, you used your corporate pension trust as collateral. I continued, my voice rising with terrifying authority. You tied your entire life savings, your entire future to her criminal enterprise. So, when Vanguard Wealth Partners quietly acquired the entire debt portfolio, we acquired the collateral too. When the FBI raided Vanessa's fake firm this morning, it triggered a massive catastrophic cross-default across every single financial instrument tied to her name. The banking software automatically executed the clause. Your pension trust was instantly liquidated to satisfy the outstanding commercial debts. Richard let out a horrible, gut-wrenching sob. He slumped completely forward, his forehead resting on the gravy-stained mahogany table. You have exactly $0 left to your name, Dad, I stated, delivering the final lethal blow. You are officially a penniless senior citizen facing a massive federal racketeering indictment. Patricia started screaming. It was a high-pitched, terrible sound of absolute total despair. She grabbed Richard by the collar, shaking him violently, demanding to know if it was true, demanding to know how he could have been so stupid. Richard could not even look at her. He just wept openly, his entire identity as a wealthy, powerful patriarch completely destroyed in a matter of seconds. Rachel, please! Richard begged, slowly sliding out of his chair. He dropped heavily onto his knees, right onto the gravy-soaked Persian rug. The great Richard Thorne, the man who used to relentlessly mock my cheap shoes and my waitressing jobs, was now kneeling at my feet, weeping like a child. 30 days, he pleaded, holding his trembling hands up toward me. I am begging you, Rachel. I am on my knees, begging my own daughter. Just give us 30 days to pack up the house. We have 30 years of memories in these walls. Your mother has her grandmother's antique china. We have the imported Italian art. We just need 1 month to hire movers to sell whatever we can and find a small apartment. You cannot just put us out on the freezing street on Christmas weekend. We will sign the deed over to Vanguard quietly. We will not fight the foreclosure. Just please let us pack our lives." Patricia fell to her knees right beside him, weeping so hard she was actively hyperventilating. "Please, Rachel," she cried, her hands clutching the hem of my tailored blazer. "My designer clothes, my jewelry. We need time to sell things. We need time to pack the silver. Have a heart. We are your flesh and blood." I looked down at them, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, satisfying clarity. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a single stiff sheet of heavy stock paper bearing the official embossed seal of the City Zoning Commission. I tossed it onto the table. It landed right in the center of the ruined holiday feast, resting against the overturned turkey platter. Richard slowly reached up with a shaking hand and pulled the paper toward him. His tear-filled eyes scanned the bold black letters at the top of the page. He looked up at me, his face completely blank with total uncomprehending shock. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "That is an expedited demolition permit," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a surgical scalpel. "Did you really think I bought the debt on this massive, pretentious mausoleum just to foreclose on it and sell it to another miserable, arrogant family? I did not buy this property to flip it for a profit, Dad. I bought the debt to erase this place from the face of the earth." I took a slow step back, looking around the grand dining room at the silk drapes, the custom crown molding, and the imported hardwood floors. "I hate this house," I said, my voice vibrating with years of suppressed righteous anger. "I hate every single inch of this property." I remember sitting on the top step of that grand sweeping staircase, watching Vanessa pose for her prom pictures in a $3,000 designer gown, while I was told I could not attend my own high school dance because I had to stay home and scrub the grout in the guest bathrooms. I remember sitting at this exact mahogany table, eating cold leftovers, while you and Mom toasted to Vanessa's fake college achievements, and told me I was nothing but a genetic disappointment who would end up cleaning toilets for a living. This house is a monument to your cruelty. It is a physical shrine to your suffocating narcissism. Vanessa let out a choked gasp, sliding down the wall, until she was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. Jamal just stared at me, his eyes wide with terrified awe. "So I foreclosed on the debt yesterday morning." I continued, watching the absolute despair wash over my parents' faces. "And the exact second the deed transferred into my holding company, I sold the entire 2-acre plot directly to the city commercial zoning department. They have been looking for prime real estate to expand the downtown infrastructure for years. They paid a massive premium for the location, and they have absolutely zero interest in preserving your imported Italian marble or your custom wrought iron gates." Patricia wailed loudly, burying her face in her hands, rocking back and forth on the ruined rug. Richard dropped the demolition permit, his hands shaking so violently he could not even hold the paper. "You do not have 30 days?" I said, my tone dropping to a deadly whisper. "You do not even have 30 hours. You have exactly until tomorrow morning to grab whatever fits in the trunks of the luxury cars you no longer own before the federal marshals arrive to impound the vehicles." I checked my Cartier watch, the diamonds catching the light of the chandelier. I looked down at my broken, weeping parents and my shattered golden sister. "Well, this has been a lovely holiday dinner. But you all have packing to do. The bulldozers arrive at exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning to turn this 6-bedroom mansion into a commercial parking garage. Take your cheap gifts and get out." I did not wait to see the final remnants of their sanity shatter. I turned on my heel, the sharp click of my designer stilettos striking the imported Italian hardwood floor, echoing like a judge striking a gavel. I did not look back at the ruined Persian rug, or the spilled wine, or the pathetic weeping husks of the people who had terrorized my youth. I simply gave Marcus a brief nod. My head of security immediately stepped back, falling into perfectly synchronized step behind me as we exited the dining room and marched across the grand foyer. "Rachel, wait!" a desperate, frantic voice echoed behind us. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded against the floorboards. Jamal had scrambled up from the gravy-soaked rug, completely abandoning his hysterical wife and my broken parents. He lunged into the foyer, his face slick with sweat and his eyes wide with the manic terror of a man who realizes he is about to lose his freedom. "Rachel, please listen to me," Jamal begged, sprinting to catch up. "You know I am a brilliant salesman. You know my numbers at the dealership were untouchable before Vanessa ruined my escrow accounts. Hire me. Give me a job at Vanguard Wealth Partners. I will do anything. I will work in the mailroom. I will sweep the lobby floors. I will cold call your lowest tier leads. Just put me on your corporate payroll so I have a legal shield when the federal agents execute their warrants. You have the best defense attorneys in the country on retainer. Just give me a chance to earn my keep." I stopped with my hand hovering inches from the polished brass handle of the heavy oak front door. I slowly turned my head and looked at him. The man who had sneered at my studio apartment, who had mocked my cheap clothes at every holiday gathering, was now literally begging to scrub my office toilets to save his own skin. He was willing to step over the bleeding corpse of his marriage just to grab a life vest. "I do not hire liabilities, Jamal." I stated, my voice flat and completely devoid of mercy. "And I certainly do not hire federal inmates." He let out a strangled gasp and lunged forward, reaching his thick hands out to grab my blazer. He never even made it within 3 feet of me. Marcus moved with terrifying, brutal efficiency. My security chief planted his heavy boots and thrust both of his massive hands directly into Jamal's chest. The impact sounded like a car crash. The shove lifted the former college athlete completely off his feet and launched him backward through the air. Jamal flew backward, crashing violently into a decorative mahogany console table in the center of the foyer. The table splintered under his heavy weight, sending a priceless Ming vase shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces across the marble tiles. Jamal groaned, clutching his bruised ribs as he writhed on the floor amidst the broken porcelain. "Do not ever reach for her again," Marcus growled, his deep voice rumbling with an unmistakable promise of extreme violence. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped out into the freezing, crisp winter night. The Arctic air hit my face instantly, clearing the cloying stench of expensive perfume roasted turkey and raw fear that had suffocated the dining room. Marcus followed me out, firmly pulling the grand double doors shut behind him with a heavy, definitive thud. The brass latch clicked, locking the monsters inside their own collapsing fortress. My chauffeur-driven Maybach was idling flawlessly at the base of the sweeping circular driveway. The sleek black paint gleamed perfectly under the pale glow of the outdoor security lights. My driver stood at attention, instantly opening the rear passenger door the moment he saw me approaching. Before stepping into the heated, luxurious cabin of the vehicle, I stopped. I stood on the pristine, snow-covered driveway and slowly turned around to look at the massive 6-bedroom Beacon Hill mansion one last time. The majestic brick facade looked exactly as it always had, projecting an aura of untouchable generational wealth and flawless upper-class superiority. But the illusion was completely dead. Even out here in the freezing driveway 50 yards away, the noise bleeding through the thick walls was absolutely deafening. It started with Patricia. Her shrill wailing pierced the night air, sounding like a wounded animal caught in a steel trap. Then Richard joined in, roaring with a furious, broken rage that lacked all of its former aristocratic authority. I could hear the distinct sound of heavy furniture being overturned and glass shattering against the hardwood floors. Vanessa was screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking as she hurled vicious, venomous insults at Jamal. Jamal was shouting right back, his deep voice vibrating with pure hatred, blaming her for his impending federal prison sentence. They were tearing each other to shreds. The unconditional love they had constantly bragged about, the flawless family unity they had used as a bludgeon to beat me down for 15 years, had completely evaporated the exact second the money vanished. Their loyalty was nothing but a fragile transactional illusion. Without their stolen wealth to insulate them, they were instantly reduced to vicious cornered rats turning on each other in the dark. I smiled, feeling a deep, profound warmth spreading through my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the heated leather seats waiting for me. I had not just taken their money, I had stripped away their masks and forced them to look at the ugly, rotting core of their own existence. I ducked my head and slid into the quiet sanctuary of the Maybach. Marcus climbed into the front passenger seat and the driver gently closed my door, instantly cutting off the muffled sounds of the screaming match echoing from the mansion. "Take us back to the city," I instructed, my voice calm and perfectly steady. The heavy luxury vehicle glided smoothly down the long driveway, leaving fresh tire tracks in the pristine snow. I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest, watching the grand wrought iron gates slowly open to let us pass. The property that had haunted my youth, the physical monument to my parents' cruelty, would be a flattened pile of rubble and rebar by Tuesday afternoon. As the Maybach turned onto the main road, smoothly accelerating away from the wealthy neighborhood, my phone abruptly vibrated inside my designer purse. The sudden harsh buzzing shattered the peaceful silence of the cabin. I pulled the device out and looked at the glowing screen. I had 5 missed calls back to back and a new voicemail waiting. The caller identification displayed a restricted number, but I knew exactly who it was. The frantic panic, the desperate need to reclaim control, the sheer terror of facing the real world without a financial safety net was about to begin. I stared at the screen, watching the digital soundwave icon pulse on the display. It was the very first voicemail of what would quickly become a relentless, desperate 6-month barrage. It was the very first voicemail of what would quickly become a relentless, desperate 6-month barrage. Exactly 30 days had passed since that freezing Christmas night in Boston. The transition from the holidays into the brutal dead of winter had been swift and unforgiving. I sat behind the massive slab of polished black marble that served as my desk inside my corner penthouse office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a flawless panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The financial district hummed with billions of dollars of corporate energy right beneath my feet. My office was perfectly climate-controlled, filled with the subtle scent of expensive leather and fresh espresso. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, resting my manicured hands on the smooth marble surface, and tapped the speaker icon on my sleek titanium desk phone. The digital audio file clicked open. The sound of howling wind and rattling aluminum immediately filled my pristine corporate sanctuary. "Rachel, please pick up the phone," my mother begged. Her voice was entirely unrecognizable. The haughty aristocratic drawl she had spent decades perfecting at country club luncheons and charity galas was completely gone. It had been replaced by a wet, trembling wheeze. She sounded small, frail, and utterly defeated. I took a slow sip of my hot espresso, letting the rich, dark roast warm my throat as I listened to the mighty Patricia Thorne completely disintegrate. "Rachel, it is, Mom," she sobbed, her voice cracking as a harsh gust of wind slammed against whatever cheap structure she was hiding inside. "Please tell me you are listening to this. We do not know what else to do. We had to leave Boston. The bank took everything. The federal marshals came and locked the gates. We are living in a decrepit RV park in upstate New York. It is a rusted tin box, Rachel. The floorboards are rotting and the wind comes right through the walls." I stared out at the towering glass skyscrapers of Wall Street, feeling absolutely no pity. I remembered my freezing cinder block apartment in Queens. I remembered wearing 2 winter coats to bed while my mother sipped vintage wine in her heated Beacon Hill mansion. The universe was finally balancing the scales. "We have absolutely nothing left," Patricia cried, her breath hitching in her throat. "Richard went to the bank yesterday to withdraw money for groceries, but his accounts are completely frozen. The tellers looked at him like he was a criminal. We are surviving on his minimum social security check. I went to the discount market this morning, and my debit card was declined. I had to put the bread and the canned soup back on the shelf while people stared at me. Rachel, I had to put the bread back." She broke down into heavy, wet sobbing. I simply swiveled my chair slightly, watching a helicopter navigate through the gray winter clouds above the city. "Your father tried to call our friends," Patricia continued, her voice dripping with a pathetic, disbelieving agony. "He called the Harringtons. He called Judge Peterson. He called everyone we have known for 30 years. They blocked our numbers, Rachel. Every single one of them. The country club sent a courier to the RV park yesterday. They did not even have the decency to call us. They sent a hired messenger to physically confiscate our membership pins and deliver a letter banning us from the premises. They treated us like we were infected with a disease. Richard has not spoken a word since the courier left. He just sits in the corner of this freezing trailer, staring at the peeling linoleum. I smiled a cold, hard smile that did not reach my eyes. The unconditional loyalty of the wealthy elite was a myth my parents had worshipped their entire lives. Now they were learning the hard way that their high society friends only loved the money. The second the bank accounts hit zero, the country club doors slammed shut forever. "Rachel, the propane heater is broken," Patricia pleaded, her voice dropping into a desperate raw whisper. "It is 9 degrees outside and we have no heat. I am wearing my only winter coat inside, but I cannot stop shivering. Dad is coughing. He is so cold, Rachel. Please. I know you hate us. I know we made mistakes. But we are freezing. Just wire us $200. Just enough to fix the heater and buy some hot food. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Please do not leave us to freeze to death." The voicemail abruptly cut off as her prepaid phone clearly ran out of minutes. The digital automated voice chimed through the speaker announcing the end of the message. I reached out and pressed the delete button without a single fraction of a second of hesitation. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. $200 was the exact amount of money she had casually handed me when she abandoned me to the wolves 15 years ago. She had watched me drown in medical debt and criminal charges with a smile on her face. Now she was trapped in a freezing aluminum box surrounded by the rotting consequences of her own boundless greed. She could freeze. I picked up my tablet to review the quarterly projections for Vanguard Wealth Partners, but a sudden flash of bright red on the massive flat-screen television mounted on my office wall caught my attention. I set the tablet down and reached for the remote, unmuting the live financial news broadcast. The scrolling ticker at the bottom of the screen flashed a breaking news alert in bold white letters across a crimson background. The news anchor sat at his desk, looking incredibly serious as footage of a federal courthouse began to play on the screen behind him. "We are interrupting our standard market coverage with breaking news out of the federal district court," the anchor announced, his voice crisp and urgent. "A massive federal indictment has just been unsealed this morning, sending shockwaves through the luxury real estate and automotive sectors." The screen switched from the anchor to raw, shaky footage taken outside a federal building. Two black, unmarked sport utility vehicles were parked at the curb, surrounded by a swarm of aggressive paparazzi and local news cameras. Federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrimes and Financial Fraud Divisions have officially executed arrest warrants for a high-profile married couple. The anchor continued as the camera zoomed in on the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. The doors swung open. A team of heavily armed federal agents marched out into the freezing winter air. Walking between the agents wearing matching bright orange standard-issue prison jumpsuits were Jamal and Vanessa. Their wrists were heavily shackled in thick steel handcuffs. A heavy metal chain wrapped around their waists, linking their wrists to their midsections. Vanessa looked absolutely terrifying. Her perfectly dyed blonde hair was a matted, greasy mess, hanging in tangled clumps in front of her face. She was devoid of all her expensive makeup, exposing the deep, dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. She kept her head down, trying to hide her face from the flashing cameras, as the federal agents aggressively marched her toward the waiting vehicles. Jamal looked entirely broken. His massive muscular frame seemed to have physically deflated inside the bright orange jumpsuit. He stared blankly ahead, his eyes completely hollow and dead. Vanessa Thorne and Jamal Thorne have been indicted on 47 counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial racketeering. The anchor reported, reading directly from a stack of legal documents. Prosecutors allege the couple orchestrated a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme utilizing a fraudulent real estate firm and illegally siphoning capital from automotive corporate escrow accounts. Federal prosecutors have stated they will be seeking the absolute maximum sentencing guidelines, which could put both defendants behind bars for up to 30 years. The news anchor's grim face vanished as I pressed the power button on the remote, plunging my penthouse office into total silence. 30 years. I let the heavy weight of that number settle over me, savoring the absolute destruction of my sister's flawlessly curated life. But I did not dwell on the moment. I had a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire to run, and Vanguard Wealth Partners required my undivided attention. Month 3 arrived, bringing the brutal freezing winds of February, tearing through the concrete canyons of Manhattan. But inside the exclusive subterranean sanctuary of the Aman Spa in Midtown, the climate was a perfect tropical paradise. I lay face down on a heated massage table draped in ultra-soft Egyptian cotton. The air was thick with the intoxicating scent of crushed eucalyptus and expensive lavender oil. Soft ambient music played quietly through hidden speakers, creating an atmosphere of absolute peace. A highly trained masseuse was expertly working warm, smooth basalt stones into the tense muscles of my upper back. I closed my eyes, letting the intense heat melt away the residual stress of closing a massive corporate acquisition in London earlier that week. My personal phone, which rested on a sleek bamboo tray beside the massage table, abruptly vibrated. The harsh mechanical buzzing clashed violently with the tranquil spa music. I had given my executive assistant strict instructions that I was only to be interrupted for catastrophic corporate emergencies. I opened one eye and glanced at the glowing screen. The caller identification simply read restricted number. Curiosity getting the better of me. I reached out and tapped the green icon, placing the device on speakerphone. An automated metallic voice immediately filled the serene room. You have a prepaid collect call from an inmate at the Metropolitan Detention Center. To accept these charges, press 1. I raised a single finger, signaling for the masseuse to pause her work. I tapped the screen. The exact second the line connected, the sound of harsh, chaotic background noise flooded the quiet spa. I heard heavy steel doors slamming shut, loud, aggressive voices echoing off concrete walls, and the unmistakable sound of someone weeping hysterically. "Rachel, please do not hang up!" Vanessa sobbed, her voice a wet, frantic mess. It was the sound of a woman who had been completely and systematically broken. Her legendary arrogance, her impenetrable superiority complex, the smug entitlement she had worn like a heavy gold crown, her entire life was entirely eradicated. She did not sound like the golden child of the Thorne family anymore. She sounded like a terrified, desperate animal backed into a dark corner. "Rachel, please, you have to listen to me." Vanessa begged, her breath hitching wildly as she choked on her own tears. "I have been in this holding block for over 60 days. It is an absolute nightmare. It is freezing and dangerous, and the women in here terrify me. They treat us like caged dogs. The food is rotting. The guards are brutal, and I have not slept more than an hour a night since they locked me in this awful place. I am losing my mind, Rachel. I am so unbelievably scared." I rested my chin on my folded hands, feeling the warm, smooth stone radiating soothing heat into my spine. I did not say a single word. I simply let her drown in her own panic. "Jamal betrayed me," Vanessa wailed, the sheer desperation making her voice crack and splinter. "He turned state's evidence. The exact second they put him in a federal interrogation room, he completely folded. He gave the prosecutors everything. He handed over the secondary commercial ledgers. He gave them the offshore routing numbers. He even turned over the encrypted emails where I explicitly authorized the fake corporate bridge loans. He threw me straight under the bus to save his own pathetic skin." She let out a ragged, horrifying sob that rattled the speaker on my phone. "He took a plea deal for 30 months in a minimum security camp," she cried. "A country club prison for white-collar criminals. They are offering him a walk in the park, while the prosecutors are threatening me with 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. They want to make an example out of me to scare off other fraudulent investors. He ruined my life, Rachel. He sold me out." I smiled, letting out a slow, silent breath. Jamal had done exactly what he had promised to do on Christmas night. He had turned over the keys to her complete destruction. The golden couple, the flawless American success story, had eaten each other alive just to survive the winter. "I need bail money, Rachel," Vanessa pleaded, her voice dropping into a desperate, begging whisper. "The judge set the bond at $2 million because they consider me a severe flight risk due to the offshore accounts. I need 10% just to secure a bondsman. $200,000 is pocket change to you. It is a rounding error in your corporate portfolio. But Mom and Dad have absolutely nothing. They are still trapped in that freezing trailer park surviving on canned beans. They cannot even afford their own groceries, let alone a federal bail bond. I listened to a loud buzzer sounding off in the background of her call, followed by a guard shouting orders. All of my personal and corporate accounts have been entirely seized by the government. Vanessa sobbed openly, weeping into the receiver. Every single one of my so-called country club friends has completely vanished. The people I bought expensive gifts for, the people I took on luxury vacations, no one will even answer my calls. Their lawyers sent me cease and desist letters just for trying to reach out. I am completely alone. You are the only one who has that kind of liquidity. You are my sister Rachel. We share the same blood. We grew up in the same house. I know I was awful to you. I know I was cruel and selfish and greedy, but I am begging you on my hands and knees. Please pay my bail. I cannot survive 15 years in a federal cage. I will not make it. Please do not leave me in here to die, please. Her pathetic begging echoed through the tranquil eucalyptus-scented air of the massage room. I looked at the sleek bamboo tray and stared at the glowing digital timer on the phone screen. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no familial obligation. The sister she was begging for had died years ago, starved of affection and mocked for her very existence. I spoke clearly, directly toward the phone's microphone. Operator, I do not accept collect calls from strangers. I reached out and tapped the bright red button, instantly severing the connection and plunging the room back into serene, beautiful silence. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, cleansing breath of the lavender-scented air. You may continue with the hot stones, I murmured to the masseuse. Exactly 3 months later, the brutal, freezing winds of February had surrendered to the stifling, humid heat of late May. I sat at the head of the massive custom glass conference table in the Vanguard Wealth Partners executive boardroom. Spread out before me were the final acquisition documents for a hostile takeover of a European logistics conglomerate. It was a massive multi-billion-dollar merger that would firmly cement my firm as an untouchable global titan. My elite legal team sat silently around the room, their eyes fixed on me, waiting for my final signature to execute the transfer of power. I picked up my platinum fountain pen, but before the finely crafted nib could even touch the thick parchment, my private secure line buzzed. This was a dedicated encrypted satellite number. Only 5 trusted people in the entire world had access to it. I raised a single hand, pausing the room, and picked up the heavy black receiver. It was not a live call. It was a recorded voice message routed directly from the main corporate switchboard, bypassing my executive assistants. I pressed the device to my ear. The voice that filtered through the high-definition speaker was hollow, raspy, and completely stripped of every single ounce of its former commanding aristocratic authority. It was Richard, my father. Rachel, please do not hang up. Richard pleaded, his words rushing out in a frantic, breathless panic. I know you hate the sound of my voice. I know you have blocked every other number your mother and I have tried to use. I paid a private investigator the very last $200 I had to my name just to find this secure routing line. Please just listen to me. Please do not press delete yet. He took a ragged, wheezing breath. His lungs sounded weak, like they were physically failing him under the crushing weight of his new reality. We have absolutely nothing left, Rachel, he continued, his voice breaking into a pathetic tremor. The federal prosecutors seized the trailer park property yesterday morning to liquidate the land for Vanessa's restitution fund. Patricia and I are living in a weekly highway motel off the interstate, and we cannot afford next week's rent. Vanessa was officially sentenced to 14 years. They transferred her to a maximum security facility in Texas last night. Jamal got exactly what he wanted. He walked away with a slap on the wrist in a minimum security camp, while your sister lost her entire life. We are destroyed. I am completely destroyed. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, watching the sunlight glint off the towering glass skyscrapers of the Manhattan Financial District. My facial expression remained entirely blank, a mask of absolute corporate detachment. And then came the words. The exact sequence of words I had spent my entire childhood desperately starving to hear. I was wrong, Rachel. Richard confessed, his voice dropping into a raw, agonizing whisper. Your mother and I were entirely, completely wrong about you. We spent decades pouring all our love, all our resources, all our blind faith into Vanessa because she looked the part, because she fit the country club aesthetic. We thought she was the golden child, but she was a parasite. She was a greedy, sociopathic parasite who drained us dry and fed us to the wolves without a second thought. You were the smart one. You were always the smart one. You had the drive, the brilliance, the sheer, untouchable resilience that I always claimed to value. I see it now. You are the only true success story this family ever produced. You are the better daughter. You are a titan. I should have backed you. I should have loved you the way you deserved. He started crying. It was not the angry, resentful weeping of a cornered narcissist facing a temporary setback. It was the pathetic whimpering of a broken old man staring directly into the abyss of his own mortality. "I am begging you, Rachel," he sobbed openly, holding nothing back. "I am an old sick man and your mother is falling apart. We have no food. We have no future. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Let me buy you a cup of coffee. Let us sit down and look at each other. Just 5 minutes to see if we can be a family again. To see if you can find it in your absolute boundless heart to forgive an arrogant fool who backed the wrong horse. I love you, Rachel. I have always loved you. Please call me back." The message ended with a soft digital click. I slowly lowered the phone, placing it face down on the glass table. I looked out the massive windows at the sprawling, endless expanse of the city below me. For 35 years, I had obsessively imagined what this exact moment would feel like. I had dreamed of the day my father would finally bow his head, admit his catastrophic failures, and acknowledge that I was the superior child. I thought it would bring me a sense of overwhelming, triumphant euphoria. I thought it would finally heal the deep, agonizing wounds of my childhood and validate every single tear I had ever shed in the dark. But sitting there in my custom-tailored suit holding the keys to a financial empire, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no triumph. There was no lingering anger. There was only a profound clinical clarity. Richard did not love me. He had never loved me. His sudden miraculous revelation about my brilliance and my worth was not born of genuine paternal affection or sudden moral clarity. It was born of absolute sheer survival instinct. He was a drowning man complimenting the sleek design of the luxury yacht he was desperately trying to hijack. He did not want to be a family. He wanted a benefactor. He wanted access to the Vanguard corporate accounts so he could upgrade from a cheap highway motel back to his comfortable life of catered meals and imported wine. The only thing Richard Thorne truly regretted was betting his pension on the wrong daughter. If Vanessa had succeeded in her massive fraud, he would still be sitting at his mahogany dining table mocking my existence and drinking expensive scotch. His apology was entirely transactional. I picked the phone back up. The digital screen illuminated, showing the heavy archive of blocked messages, unread texts, and desperate voicemails that had accumulated over the past 6 months. It was a visual graveyard of their spectacular downfall, a digital monument to their total destruction. I did not save the audio file to gloat over later. I did not forward the pathetic confession to my lawyers to use as leverage. I simply looked at the bold red text at the bottom of the glowing screen. I pressed my perfectly manicured finger against the glass, hitting the delete all button. The archive instantly vanished permanently, wiping away every single trace of the Thorne family from my existence. The screen went blank, taking their toxic legacy, their greed, and their pathetic apologies into the digital void forever. I set the phone aside and looked up at my waiting legal team, offering them a sharp, brilliant smile. "Hand me the pen, gentlemen," I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Let us close this deal." The heavy platinum pen glided across the thick parchment, leaving a trail of dark blue ink that officially altered the global financial landscape. I signed my name with sharp, decisive strokes. The moment the final loop of my signature was complete, the heavy silence in the boardroom shattered. My legal team erupted into enthusiastic applause. The senior partners stood offering firm handshakes and deferential nods. The merger was completely finalized. Vanguard Wealth Partners was no longer just a major player in the financial sector. We were the undisputed apex predators. I accepted their congratulations with a practiced, composed smile. I watched as they packed their leather briefcases and filed out of the executive suite, leaving me standing alone in the massive glass-walled room. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut. The silence that settled around me was profound. It was not the cold, terrifying silence of isolation I had known in my freezing Queens apartment all those years ago. It was the rich, warm silence of absolute, total control. I turned away from the custom glass table and walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled out beneath me, a glittering grid of ambition and power. I looked at my reflection in the glass, and for the first time I addressed you directly. Society beats a very specific, relentless narrative into our heads from the absolute second we are born. We are handed a script and expected to memorize the lines without ever questioning the plot. Blood is thicker than water. Forgive and forget. Family is everything. You only get one mother. You only get one father. We are conditioned by movies, television commercials, and well-meaning friends to believe that biological connection is some sacred, unbreakable covenant. We are told that we must constantly strive to keep the peace. We are told that the holidays are meant for going home. We see the advertisements with the perfectly roasted turkeys and the smiling grandparents passing gifts across a beautifully set table. We are sold this flawless fantasy of unconditional love and unwavering support. But for so many of us, going home does not mean safety. It means walking back into an emotional war zone. It means bracing yourself for the passive-aggressive comments about your career or your relationship status. It means shrinking yourself down into a tiny, manageable box so you do not outshine the golden child. It means swallowing your pride and chewing on your own tongue just to avoid an argument that will inevitably be blamed on you anyway. Nobody ever tells you what to do when your family is the exact thing actively trying to destroy you. Nobody hands you a manual on how to survive when the people who are biologically wired to protect you are the ones deliberately holding your head under the water. Keeping the peace usually just means silently absorbing their war. It means setting yourself on fire just to keep them warm. For 35 years, I bought into that toxic myth. I let them treat me like an unwanted ghost haunting their pristine Beacon Hill mansion. I let them mock my ambitions, minimize my struggles, and casually discard me the second I became a financial inconvenience. I believed that if I just worked a little harder, became a little smarter, or achieved a little more, they would finally look at me with the same blind adoration they showered on Vanessa. I was wrong. And Richard was wrong too. His pathetic, desperate voicemail was the ultimate proof. Richard and Patricia operated under the deeply flawed delusion that giving me life somehow entitled them to my soul. Vanessa believed that sharing my last name gave her a permanent free pass to treat me like human garbage. They all thought that biological connection was a universal currency that could buy unlimited forgiveness, no matter how severe the abuse. It is not. Blood does not entitle people to your bank account. It does not give them the right to drain your peace of mind. It certainly does not grant them a permanent lifelong lease on your sanity. Richard called me the better daughter in his voicemail. He called me a titan. He thought flattery would act as a skeleton key to unlock my vault. He honestly believed that after 35 years of emotional starvation, a few breadcrumbs of forced praise would be enough to bring me running back to the table. It is almost laughable how little he actually knows me. He does not understand that I stopped being his daughter the day he handed me $200 and told me to figure out my own survival. Walking away from my family was not a tragedy. The real tragedy would have been staying. The tragedy would have been allowing them to drag me down into the muddy, freezing swamp of their own endless greed. I watched my sister orchestrate a massive federal fraud scheme just to maintain an illusion of wealth. I watched my parents abandon every single moral principle they claimed to possess the second the country club doors slammed in their faces. They were hollow people chasing hollow lives. Cutting off a toxic family is entirely misunderstood. People will call you cold. They will call you ruthless. They will whisper about you at dinner parties and say you lack empathy. Let them whisper. Cutting off toxicity is not an act of cruelty. It is the absolute ultimate act of radical self-care. It is looking directly at the people who systematically broke you and finally deciding that you are worth putting yourself back together. You do not owe your abusers a seat at your table just because you share a genetic code. You do not owe your success to the people who actively bet against your survival. I built my empire entirely from the dark, heavy ashes of their rejection. I took every single stone they threw at me, every insult, every mockery, every door they slammed in my face, and I used them to build an impenetrable fortress. I turned my trauma into rocket fuel. I took the deep, gnawing hunger for their validation and transformed it into a relentless, ravenous hunger for success. I am not a victim. I am a titan. I did not just survive the Thorn family. I completely outgrew them. I outmaneuvered them. I watched them build their house out of straw and vanity, and when the winter winds finally came howling through, I sat in my penthouse and simply watched it blow away. I did not lift a finger to destroy them. I just stopped offering myself up as their human shield. They destroyed themselves. There is a profound, beautiful liberation in pressing that delete button. There is incredible power in looking at a glowing screen filled with the desperate, begging apologies of your abusers and realizing that their words have absolutely zero power over you anymore. You do not have to carry their guilt. You do not have to carry their shame. You can just set it down and walk away. They called me a freeloader. Now they're the ones begging for a handout. Have you ever had to cut the cord on a toxic family member who thought they could walk all over you? Tell me your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of taking back your power. The ultimate lesson from Rachel's journey is that biological ties do not grant a free pass for abuse, nor do they entitle anyone to the peace and success you have built with your own hands. Society frequently romanticizes the concept of family, but true independence requires the courage to recognize when those closest to you are actually your greatest destructive force. Walking away from a toxic environment is not an act of cruelty. It is the most profound form of self-preservation. Choose to surround yourself with genuine support rather than obligation. Please share your own stories of overcoming toxic relationships in the comments below.